2, we're going to have the site remain open for at least an hour after the session closes. So if you had ideas and there's something you really wanted to say but didn't have a chance to say it, that's your opportunity. And we promise you that we'll be going over all of those comments carefully afterwards to try to figure out the right follow-up. And finally, even after the event is over tomorrow, we'll give you a place to send any additional comments that you might have, whether they're questions or comments, and we'll pledge to you to make sure that those comments are put to good use and get to the right people. So please don't be shy. You're not here to listen. You're here to participate. It's not a listening forum, it's a learning forum. And the only way to learn truly is to be a true participant. So use those 4 functions: the chat box, the breaks in the sessions, the time after the session on day 2, and the period after the 2-day session to incorporate any ideas, thoughts, action items that you think may not have been emphasized enough or that you think deserve priority. We truly hope you'll take advantage of those features. That's our best effort to take a virtual meeting and make it truly be participatory. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Larry, for those opening words. At this moment, next slide, please. And let's introduce Steering Committee Co-Chair.
Yes, thank you. Good afternoon to the members of the PFRA Steering Committee and to everybody online, and also to the facilitators. I'm pleased to be joining this meeting this afternoon. Let me start by acknowledging the presence of the Undersecretary in the Ministry of Peace Building, Philippe Michael Pia, and also want to recognize my co-chair, Ross Cooper, who's the Deputy Development Director at FCDO at the United Kingdom. I also want to recognize the presence here today of the community and state leaders and delegate and representative from Awil, from WAO, from Torit, and from Yambio. Also want to acknowledge the representative of the donor community, the NGO, the international NGOs as well. And also from what I saw at the beginning, a huge number of people participating from the Regional and Global Resilience Network. We also have participants from EGAD and participants from USAID. We very much welcome all of you. And I want to particularly also at the end recognize my colleague from the United Nations. I want to extend a very warm welcome to all of you, and also for having taken the time to join this 2020 Annual Learning Forum for the PFRA. Somebody probably will say, well, it's 2021 now, we're calling it 2020, but as many of you are aware, this meeting should have taken place earlier, but was postponed due to very valid reasons. We wanted to make sure that we have the right setup for everybody to be able to participate. We also wanted to take the time to make sure that people are properly consulted. And since this is a learning event and sharing event, we also want to make sure that we take time to make sure that the participation modality are clearly laid out so that everybody from every part of the country who wants to participate is able to join. So this is why the meeting was delayed. I also want to pay special tribute here to colleagues who have worked tirelessly as members of the task force that we have set up in the past few weeks to deliver the 2020 Annual Learning Forum today. We very much appreciate your efforts and dedications in organizing the event in the face of many logistical challenges and also in a difficult context of COVID-19. The last 2 meetings, as was said earlier by Lara Cooley, were organized in person. This is the first time we do it online. It took a while to really get the logistical setup right, but I'm happy that we are here now. Allow me to start by reminding all of us that the rationale and purpose for setting up the Partnership for Recovery and Resilience more than 2 years ago was to unite the donors, the UN entities, the NGOs, the governments, to work collectively to reduce vulnerabilities and to build people's and communities' ability to cope with shocks. Our interests and intentions are and remain to support the country's recovery towards sustainable development. We have organized our work, as you can recall, around 4 key pillars. And those pillars of actions include the following. First, we want to make sure this is a platform we all advocate very strongly and loudly about the fact that you need to really work at the same time as you are working to find peace and are working to deal with humanitarian need. You need to work at the same time to make sure that people's resilience are also built. So that was first part, is really advocate at all levels. The second one was to make sure that we accompany this with engagement in area-based programming so that people can start to really fend for themselves and organize themselves in an area, and they to really have a programmatical approach that is based in the area that is also integrated. The third is that as we do that, knowledge will be generated both here, but as people are also doing it in other parts of the world, there are knowledge being generated around the concept of resilience and recovery. So we decided that it was important that we manage knowledge and learn from ourselves and from others as we go along the process. And the fourth thing that we say was going to be a key pillar in which we engage ourselves is to really start moving to getting more, I would say, management of data and evidence-based understanding of what it means to move from a point A to point B in the curve of resilience, and to really work on what we call data gathering and monitoring and evaluations. The aspirations of the PFRR and our collective actions under these framing pillars of work remain therefore valid and relevant today. While the peace process in the country is holding, South Sudan continues to face multiple challenges that call for sustained collaborations and partnerships. The government of national unity is finally in place, and after much delay, we also have now the state governors are in place. Appointment of authorities at the decentralized levels also have started. It is therefore important for this momentum to be maintained so that we have sustained stability at all levels in the country. Stability at the decentralized level will be key to anything that we are advocating for beyond what we are doing in the pilot area. We want to also make sure an engagement on area-based programming, and engagement to build people's resilience, and engagement of community or state level to start to work to rebuild their own system are something that we need to advocate for also broadly. And for that to happen, stability at all levels will be required. In between 2019 and 2020, 2 devastating floods affected more than 800,000 people each year. We also have invasions of locusts, increasing inter-communal violence with growing displaced people. And we also have added to that the COVID pandemic and the negative impact it have on the health, education, and the economy. And you combine all of these things, and you have a tremendous deteriorating humanitarian conditions, as well as a weakening of the development context. Currently, we have more than 8 million people estimated to be in need of some form of humanitarian assistance. And we also have 7 million plus people who will need some food assistance in the lean season going forward. At the same time, as I said earlier, the economy has remained under pressure with growing budget deficit and very limited investment in key sectors such as health, education, and agriculture. Over the past couple of years, however, great efforts have been made by the government, both for the central and decentralized level, development partners, and despite the 2020 challenge of the COVID, more than 5 million people have received assistance from the humanitarian actors. NGOs, UN agencies, and other partners have also worked hard with the government at all levels to delivery of a program in the developing area worth more than $300 or $400 million in the past year. All of these were made possible by the generous contribution from our donor community, principally in engaging with us, not only in funding activity that are being implemented, but also joining forums such as the PFR and others to also share their ideas how we can move forward to trying to get people to work much more strongly also on building resilience. The World Bank and the African Development Bank have also contributed tremendously in areas such as social protections, the health, agricultural productions, women and youth empowerment, public financial management, and local governance, and many more. I want to talk about a couple of the points that I see that we can really work on as we go forward. The challenges facing the countries are not final. They are growing every day, and there's still more to do. Now it is the time to redouble our partnership effort through better planning, increased prioritizations, and building back better through the integrated area-based programming, particularly in starting with what we are now doing in Awil, Wau, Torit, and Yambio. In this regard, it is important that we recommit ourselves to the PFR principles, and I just want to list a couple of them. To stop the trend of increasing vulnerability. That I cannot overemphasize. That's what our main purpose is. The second one is to work effectively at the intersections of the humanitarian and development effort. And here I may also add basically the third part of the nexus to it, which is basically the peace building effort. As I said earlier, we cannot do this if we don't have a stable environment. And similarly, if we do not really manage to stop people from falling into the crack if they need an immediate assistance, we won't have the basis upon which we can now build recovery. And recovery and resilience is important also for the peace process, because people can start to see that they see what you might call the dividend of peace. They can start to rebuild a life for themselves. And that in itself, it creates more stability that can advance further the political process that we are doing. So peace building, resilience, and what you're doing on the humanitarian side all are interrelated. But the emphasis here is that we cannot do two and not do the third one. That's why this work we are doing on the partnership to really advocate for strongly to continue to build on resilience and people's ability to recover is so important. In going forward, the 2020 Annual Learning Forum presents a unique platform to fully engage all of us on all the critical challenges that we have been facing and to translate them into opportunity as we go, because you meet to learn, but you also need to reflect on how you can do better going forward. The COVID-19 pandemic has further reminded all of us of the importance of partnership and collaboration to advance recovery and development objectives as a global. There is no one single partner that is placed to address all these issues we face today in South Sudan. We need each other, and we need each other more than ever. I want to therefore challenge the 2020 Annual Learning Forum through its deliberations to identify action that will enhance our value added on the following point. Number one, how do we increase our joint advocacy for better area-based recovery and resilience? Number two, how do we optimize opportunity for increased joint funding for also area-based programming? And third is, how do we maximize our collective actions and approaches that reflect truly the community aspirations? And number four is, we want to ensure that as we move forward, we keep the PFRR as an agile mechanism that remain relevant in the changing context in which we are operating. These are four broad areas that I will really challenge all of us in the next 2 days as we go through a different path of discussions. We start to think about that, because these are some of the things that will be very useful for us to really stay true to the original and true to the commitment that we have made, and continue to find a better way to really do what we are doing going forward. We therefore need to optimize our collective comparative advantage and complementarities to help put the country on a pathway to addressing growing humanitarian need and achieve long-term development. And we can't do this alone. We have to do this with everybody here, with the government and all of us. I cannot finish my remark without putting a strong emphasis on the importance of putting local community at the forefront of our dialogue. I said this before and I'll say it again. In gathering vital information that enable us to have meaningful and effective decisions to be made, we need to listen to the community at the level. We need to also adapt our method to be flexible. What is happening in Yambio does not have to be exactly what's happening in Torit. If we understand that some of the principles that we have agreed to work on remain really along the line of what we are doing, there could be variations in the way that this committee and that committee is set up in each area. And that's go from the fact that each of these areas and the future ones have been engaged on their own in organizing themselves, and what they have organizing themselves to do need to be taken into considerations and build upon as we provide, I would say, an organized way to try to really get much more efficiency and effectiveness as we go. So ladies and gentlemen, I would like to end here by appreciating again the financial contributions and the technical contribution from all the donors, the NGOs, the UN colleague, to really make sure that this forum finally takes place. And we want to be able to do this without your hard work. And we really hope that we can have fruitful deliberations in the next couple of days. I therefore thank you for your attentions and very much look forward to our exchange. Thank you again to the facilitators, and I will pass the floor back on to you. Over to you.
Thank you, Alain, for getting us off to such a meaningful start. I think you've touched about every possible issue that's before us. The challenge for us this year is going to be to get beyond words to actions, and to do that on the backs of the activities that have already begun at the local level. Our job from the outside, I think, is to listen hard to this and see where our role is and how to perform it most effectively. And to that end, I hope the communities are going to speak in the strongest, clearest voice possible. To help us get going on this, I'm now going to call on Roz Cooper, the Deputy Development Director for FDCO, and the other co-chair of the PFRR, to give us some sense of how it looks from her side of the street. Roz?
Hello, yes, there we are. I don't know whether my internet will stand up to camera for the whole time, but let's start that way and see what happens. Thank you very much, Alain, and everybody for the organization and getting us started so far. I think actually it is a major achievement to get this event happening, given the problems, given the challenges that we've had to work through to get this going. That I'm really impressed with actually managing to get it to happen. And I think, as will become clear as we go through the 2 days, it is the process that is behind these 2 days also that has provided huge value to the PFRR, getting people to talk together, listening to the really important stories from the ground, and getting people prepared and participating in this meeting in groups within the partnership areas as well as all over the world. And I've been reading through the hellos in the chat, and I'm really impressed with the breadth of participation. So that is wonderful to see. Alain and I didn't coordinate our opening remarks for all sorts of logistical and other reasons. That hasn't been possible, but you will see quite a lot of similarity and complementarity on what we felt was important to say. The last year, I was thinking back, in March last year, I was part of a trip to Nzara to look at some of the achievements in the sort of broader Yambio Western Equatoria area around the Partnership for Resilience and some of the things that have actually managed to be delivered on the ground there. And thinking back to that visit, which seems such a long time ago now, and we've all been through so much since then, I really did worry about whether the partnership could continue to adapt and thrive under such very difficult circumstances. I mean, Alain has very clearly outlined some of the challenges that South Sudan in particular has been facing, the people have been facing, from increased conflict, the flooding, economic crises, severe food insecurity that we're all trying to address, and thinking sort of more long-term, thinking about resilience in those sorts of circumstances is really hard. So, but is essential. If we want to maintain any sort of progress and not have more people falling back into difficult circumstances, this has to be our focus. So in many ways, the last year has really shown that this is important, but at the same time is making it very difficult to do. So not just the COVID-19 problems that we've all faced and the real difficulty that many of us have in actually getting out of Juba or getting to South Sudan in the first place. It's been very difficult. But it does really underline the validity of the original motivation behind the PFRR. We need to work together to find ways of supporting the communities to face whatever shock comes. And also very clearly underlines the necessity of a broad-based response, as well as a definition that the response has to be broad to match that. So the emphasis on increasing and maintaining access to basic services, the restoration of productive capacities, the real rebuilding trust in institutions, and really nurturing the partnership and us being able to work together still really remain the important focus for our effort. The other things that have been worrying me that might challenge the PFRR, as in addition to all the sort of very specific things we've talked about and COVID-19 itself, is some of the changes that, again, Alain has mentioned in the way that South Sudan is organized politically and administratively, the change from 32 states to 10, the change in political leadership and administration and etc., which just shows that the broad base of the PFRR has actually been a strength, because we are not dependent on one or two individuals in any particular location or a particular political leader. This is something that can endure and adapt and become flexible compared to whatever circumstances there are in any particular location. And I think the fact that many changes, not just actually in the South Sudanese leadership, but also many changes in the UN, the NGO, and the donor community, that often is a point at which an old program is dismissed and a new approach is wanted because there are new people who want to do something fresh. But actually, the fact that people are committed to the PFRR, to the partnership, to this way of working, that they want to pass that on to the people who follow them, and the fact that the people who come see that this actually is something worth preserving and worth building on and working with. Again, it, for me, is a validation of the strength of the concept of what we're trying to do, and also of the demonstrable progress that there has been around the country. And I think that is something that can really give us a hope for future years. Just coming back to a point that Larry made actually in his opening comments, I've been involved in the PFRR over 3 years now, and I was going to reflect, there has been a real shift in our discussions. So to start with, it was necessarily a lot of discussion, a lot of theory, a lot of debate about approaches, a lot of looking at the data, a lot of understanding, what does resilience mean to you, what does it mean to this person, etc. And that has moved from very much more focus on what is actually going on the ground, and an increasing voice on the part of the people of the communities who we want to support to take the leadership in anything that is going to be meaningful and sustainable. And that's exactly how it should be. And I agree. There's been a real shift that we can see over the 3 annual learning events and the general interactions and the focus of discussion over that period. And that is really, really good to see. And I think the way that this event has been developed and the process that has led us all here and what we're going to hear over the next couple of days really demonstrate that shift, which is great. Another point that Alain made is that wherever the partnership is implemented, or wherever people take on the ideas and start trying to work with some of the ways of working behind the partnership ideas, things will be different. And I think that for me, again, was another strength that I especially noticed during the learning event last year, where communities were saying, oh, we do it this way, or actually, no, we've ditched that part, we've merged this, we've decided to focus on this, we've adopted something we were already doing and brought that into the way that the partnership works in our area. That sort of local innovation really, for me, demonstrates a sort of an ownership, a willingness to make it work, to solve any problems as they arise. And that is, without that, no endeavor really has any strength or chance of lasting. The first problem will just make it fall apart. And it also really challenges particularly some of the donors and the UN agencies about a fixed way of working. Actually, no, it needs to be like this in this place because of this context that we understand. So that is a great feature that I see in the partnership. I'm now getting to the point where I'm about to leave South Sudan, which is very sad for me. But it does present an opportunity, sort of reflection. And I look back on a large number of fascinating trips to see the PFRR in action, to meet people working through it in the ground, either in Juba or wherever they might be, Wow, Wheel, Orit, Yambio and Zara, I mean, wherever. And I've had the privilege of participating in some of the activities around developing action plans and sort of working with people and listening to their particular concerns and how they come up with the local solutions wherever they are. And that has been really, really important for my continuing engagement, motivation around this whole enterprise. I've been in many advocacy events, technical meetings, presentations of research findings and problem solving sessions, and of course all the learning events, and really seeing it develop and deliver, and the way that we have been able to sort of draw on some really cutting edge technical research and data analysis and that sort of thing, but not as an end in itself, but really putting that behind the community-led effort, so that what they're doing has more chance of being successful, and they're really addressing the problems, not just as they see it, but as everybody is in their areas are identifying as that is key. So, the whole represents a huge amount of commitment and effort from everybody involved at all levels, and it has been a privilege, wonderful to see this and to see the whole thing develop. There will of course continue to be challenges, and I really hope that we hear all about that during this event, because sitting around praising ourselves for a job well done, it doesn't foster progress. We need to be honest about what needs fixing, what's good, and really sort of build on that. But I think I reflect on the fact that the new ways of working with a focus on community first, of course, but also a huge focus for donors, the UN, and other partners on coordination and collaboration, and that is the way we are going to deliver solutions. And I really have confidence that the partnership will continue to support vulnerable communities to take control of their development, and that is wonderful. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, and thank you and all the participants for having moved things as far ahead as they quite obviously have moved. As you say, Roz, the proof is in the pudding, and we'll show it or not in terms of our actions. But one of the things that's definitely upon us now is the chance to continually take these sorts of ideals and principles turn them into what we do every day. And we're going to try to give you a little bit of a flavor of that by showing it from the community up. This will come as no surprise to those of you who are at the community level, as a way of giving you a firsthand look of what some of this looks like from the community level up.
Yes, thank you very much, Larry. I'm happy to introduce you virtually to Suleiman, to Victor, to Elizabeth and Achan, our very own faces of resilience, all the way from Torit, from WOW, from Yambia, as well as Awil states. So the individuals will give us their perspectives on how they have been bent but not broken by many of the shocks that have been highlighted in the opening remarks. We will hear how their households, how their communities, the communities they live in, and even the systems in their environments have resisted, have absorbed, accommodated, adapted to, transformed, and even recovered from the effects of many of the shocks. Now, who are these faces of resilience we're about to see? So they are members of the communities across the 4 states where multiple partners are working together to support recovery and build resilience. We've heard a lot about how the different partners from the different sections are working together in one effort to build the resilience. Now, their unique experiences will showcase community-led initiatives to cope with, at times, one, and in some cases, unfortunately, multiple shocks. So community strengths as well as priorities being showcased from these 4 states are very important to partners working to support their recovery and resilience. I think you've heard that we've transitioned much from looking at the theory of the definitions to hearing from the communities themselves in terms of how they want to move forward to strengthen and improve their recovery and resilience. The experiences highlighted inform a collective approach. This is us working together to coordinate and integrate complementary humanitarian and development assistance, and also incorporating initiatives on so that we are along the peace, humanitarian, and development nexus. And we have 4 main pillars that we're working around: the rebuilding trust in people and institutions, reestablishing access to basic services, restoring productive capacities, and of course, nurturing the very partnerships that help us to work together as stakeholders. Now, why is it essential for us to hear from these communities today, from these 4 states? Well, when you've had their experiences, I hope you understand what resilience looks like, firstly, from the household and from the community perspective, because that's what we deem is most important. And you can be able to visualize the needs in terms of building resilience in such vulnerable communities. And this could apply to anyone from private sector, donors, UN agencies, non-governmental organizations, local or international. I hope that you will also be inspired to continue to engage these communities and to equip them to deliver on their own ambitions as well as their commitments in order to change and to build resilience. Now, after you've listened to these 4 unique experiences, Daniel Deng, the Policy Link South Sudan lead, will take us through an informative session on how the partners working for recovery and resilience used a very interesting tool of institutional mapping to drive the community-based discussions and set priorities so that we have a community-led or a community-driven priority setting. Let us now hear from our very own faces of resilience from all the 4 states.
Mina cho panabunin ngay kakadumit panabuno ko nga diben san ka nga charan owan nga chalo ka ana chan tong kwa isa ena lo alang mit kangwan karatan munti mani ay life Agwa niya pa yan. Kamamaya na tatin. Timan kabay. Wan lu yang su buka siya aratan kaya full kasi tuan chayo. Alo telenga chol panabun kana ba koy len zaman ku gar ba yo mun chen dan to anya cha e ben le ben chan ka ngai la ga e ya ku ken ka le wali alang zaman di ta pa cha pa ga ya man war bi med be ba man kan ban yo bare an chit ke chelang ron ku pa ka be tara ba waran pula ko dara ko be na jara ko kudilla en guir kang be ku tuak ma ku lag barat ku sab ka tan ku di shay rano ben ba den ga leng tar ya len tan ku yok shay di ji por ka ba ku chot shay ku dik te shay lai ya ko chita di yo ka ya guir ke na di bu karasi chi ayo tir kwan mu da Yen malane ma ya ne linyan hun na war cha nyu jara pin ba wele lan bi ya la cha ne ne ande ngong in mo inde chi jal bela jeji wala ngurun we ke kang be la lu na e ker kan ke la pona wa kapur wala ge ni min la na lan ku chayo ke kin kifaya ke yo ke we ka da ka to ku ke
Ara na koin kan ma ko kien dir ke na ngin ko china da ra ba ke na china da ke kaman ku ye koin ba dong ke dei ba ni cha wan tin ko nya ni na tin ko nya ni kan dong ke dei ba lang loy om ye ka koin tin ko ni cha
I think in the African way, they normally say, don't expect somebody to start something for you. So you should have at least little thing that you do. That's when now you can gain the support. My name is Kumba Victor, the medical director for Yambe State Hospital. Yambe State Hospital, that is the state referral hospital, providing all the basic services. So it is the hospital that normally the community supports, and also it has the implementing partners. It has also some committees. So a committee was formed by the Hospital Advisory Board, which assessed all the conditions within the hospital. Very many things were found out, and then they made a day for fundraising. The community came up and they agreed to raise funds for the renovation of the cycle ward. There were a lot of contribution from the communities. So others also, they gave us sand. Others also contributed, like they said they will bring water, depending on their level.
This hospital, with the resources from people and that money from World Vision, that place now, which we call medical world, now you can see the status what it is. It was bad. Potholes, there was no tiles in it. We're not even pushing a trolley in it. We brought people to see, and they saw, and people extended their hands with contribution. And then the hospital, which was going bad, was down. I would like to thank the people among the nurses who are working in the two wards. There were still nurses who were working there. Although the situation was dilapidated the way it was, they were still there to help, to do what they could do. And the people are resilient in the sense that, yeah, if you have resources, that even when problems come, you can fall back to. The resources are there, you only need to put them in the right places. And the people volunteer to do it, minus their problems.
الكارثة لما نيجي بفقد وراه، بترك وراه آثار. وانت بتشوفه يعني في بيتي عندنا فقدنا أسر، فقدنا أبناء، فقدنا إخوان وأخوات وكده بسبب الظرف ده. أنا اسمي جمعة سليمان رمضان قتي. هسه لو انت مشيت في محل الجرس في كنيسة، معظم الناس الدفوا لهم هناك ده ناس من موسى، فكان له تأثير. فوانس مين أنا اتحركت كان علامة لأسرة قال خلاص نمشي، إذا جمعة مشى نمشي. فدات واي أنا اتحركت عشان نقول للمواطنين أنا يا هسه مشيت، انتم ما ممكن تمشي عشان معنا هم فيه أنا كنت بشوفه بعد تمام. بوسط الزراعة ده صراحة قد أوفر بسيط من معيشة بتاعي في الأسرة، يعني قد نلقى بسيط يعني، وبالفعل قد بيغطي لنا. أنا افتكرت العمل الزراعي تم اختفاء ذاتي، يعني مثلا ببساطة أنت بتلقى ورا الشيل بتاعتك جنب البيت، أنت بتناول في وجباتك بدون ما يعني حولك بيكون خضارك متوفر، أنت بتتناوله ببساطة. أما اليوم يعني غيروا من ما كان يعملوه بحث. أنا لما بيشوف زي نفس الزرع اللي كان من صغير ده قداو، لما يشوف زرع تعلم بهذا الصورة، لكن بس داير يعني الوضع بتاعه يكون أعم شوية. أنا متأكد البوراي حيكونوا مبسوطين. بالأخص بيعمل تزرع، شايف إذا أنا قاعد أفكر إن نعمل بذرة ده أنا شتت تحت وقومته ويا هو شايفه، أنا افتكرت أنا متفاعل، أنا أشوف منظر ده معناه أنا متجدد معه، عشان كده ما في حاجة اللي بيجرني منه.
Zaman ta chakila deke ma vizol kan gato bisa nasa ino na gido rubes gaba. Simi Elizabeth Tilam ana beletai wo ya authority na gigeni hela tai ya askal na gigeni fuguni. Na kan gamul group ten na deve diri je limbu sanduk tamba molo group de to wali zaman biga dak jamolo sanduk de kan na jide de kan na sa jide meskeya taban yala zaman biga jata lao gali fi musada tani tam bisala sabun de bijibu leta ngurusi ya na jali mu badon ten na nadi na ro kutu badon ten na mahal wai na nadi to sim ten na gal na uriu na ro ma sabun de. Zaman biga mono di dena na datte bi ajade kaman taban sadina na fi group sadina kan bio rebe to monde wayal tabande na bisa yala taninde na bi kutete tan mara na bi reja fi kim kolde taban digo kim koldi ni sede goy kaman tabura dige na ko mal to de gali gisiru de ta gurus sedi ya ulise na gineng neng fogo suya nakad na burata la fok kasi tagaira tomon zaman na lisa gibada de tagaira de fike asede ana yanu nas group de biga mun burta tajat kulan na gamodu de mun zato ki support fogo kana na gamol ajat na yanu tagaira fi business de na de gurwa lakin makal besi au guat na bigeni gali de makal kida ya mafi lakin na biga endu tagaira di sokol tenna de para na gigeni bigane daf makalam tasabunde ya group kana gamulo ya zol fi group bisilu to bisilu to tande bisilu to ta kama bisilu to ina zata ya bibada bio minak sasa biga fadol de na bura silu yana sabara ko fe kama nas biga arfu gal na solori gamu lanja mo bija le na minya bija bio yala guru zaina bisal bomon ajat kida na arfu gala ay filan alela de ta bisilu o bisibu tande na bikutu tet taban na magi fadi sanduk de kulu na bikutu tan tet ta jibukin koltani ya ina gi hay ko gasidi ajere ken ya no pes ya unas limu fogo lo kana ja batal kanas ma bilimu badun
Hello to everyone. Very happy to be with you and also happy to be following those great stories. I think they do ground and also frame the presentation that I'll be giving. As you can see, it's called Community First, but Not Alone. Before I get started, and I'll speak for about 15 minutes, I just echo Larry's request that people use the chat function. Any comments, any questions, anything you think, any reactions, like this beautiful video that I see from Jim Statman. Thank you, Jim. Please put them in the chat. We will definitely make use of them. And so now let me begin by remembering our first ALF in 2018, which basically presented the guiding vision of the Partnership for Recovery and Resilience and its foundational principle, community first, but not alone. The principle means that the international community should not substitute, but rather reinforce a local community's internal capacities for resilience. The following year, at the ALF 2019, the Food and Agriculture Organization challenged us to harmonize, contextualize, simplify, and communicate evidence to empower local level decision-making. The World Food Program added that we should go to the communities, ask them what they need, and help them amplify their voices and agency. This year's ALF demonstrates the application of this advice with the aim to reinforce the leadership, aspiration, and ownership of local communities. Next slide. Since a community functions as a system, activities within a community should build from foundational institutional architecture and systems flow. Accordingly, the PFRR Steering Committee endorsed PolicyLink to carry out an institutional mapping survey to generate a bird's eye view of the critical institutions, structures, processes, and capacities relevant to the PFRR. This slide shows that 605 total respondents representing 345 institutions across the 4 partnership areas participated in the survey, which mapped 3,068 distinct relationships triggered by shock response, and touched a total of 683 institutions. We carried out another 66 focus groups across the 4 counties, and we then communicated this evidence back to the respondents, focusing on 4 buckets of evidence. The first bucket focused on shocks, their frequencies, and their relative severity. The second bucket, the impacts of COVID-19, as well as the COVID-19 restrictions. The third, assets as drivers of conflict. And the fourth, institutional access to resources. Communities made sense of this evidence through town hall meetings, in which 88% of the original respondents participated. These inclusive community deliberations produced a set of priorities for shock response that served as inputs for the next round of face-to-face deliberations where community members discussed and refined them with implementing partners. At this year's ALF, delegates from the field will present the highest ranking priorities to you. When you hear them, know they emerged from this highly iterative set of feedback loops. Next slide. Now let's consider some of the high-level findings. This slide shows institutional respondents' perception of shocks. On the left, you'll see the 8 shock categories listed in order of frequency, severity, and duration of impact. What we see here is that economic shocks were seen as most frequent with long-term major impacts, followed by sexual and gender-based violence, and then health. Security shocks were considered as being less frequent, but also with similar long-term severe impacts. Food and livelihood shocks, extended dry spells, floods, and wildfires were seen as less frequent and also considered as having severe but less severe impacts. Next slide. We also asked about assets as drivers of conflict. Our findings demonstrated land as the primary driver of conflict, followed by livestock and forests. Although blessed with abundant, fertile, and rain-fed land, competition for land is tearing communities apart. In terms of cattle, many households use dairy milk to supplement nutrition, and they also sell cows in times of necessity in order to get income for other requirements. Gifting cows in South Sudan also creates reciprocity relationships, which strengthen social safety nets, a key feature of resilience. In times of food shortage, more households rely on forest harvesting than on food aid. And furthermore, charcoal from the forest is a major source of supplemental income for many households across South Sudan. Conflict around land, cattle, and forests therefore constitute a primary security shock, as well as preventing people from utilizing these resources to strengthen their resilience. We also found that water, fishing, and markets are least likely of all the assets to drive conflict. This is consistent with the resilience profile findings that agriculture and markets actually often drive cooperation in South Sudan. Next slide. Regarding the impacts of COVID-19 and the COVID-19 restrictions, the vast majority of respondents disagreed that there are many COVID-19 cases in their community. They had an even greater disagreement that there have been many deaths due to COVID-19. However, when asked about the impacts of COVID-19 restrictions on the community, 96% agreed or strongly agreed that the restrictions increased economic challenges. 92% that they resulted in loss of income and employment. 88% that they increased health shocks. 87% that they increased hunger. 73% sexual and gender-based violence. 74% theft. 65% armed robberies. 71% household violence, and 40% decreased the ability to take care of crops or livestock. Almost 100% of respondents reported negative impacts due to the closing of schools because of COVID-19 restrictions. The closing of schools impacts other social indicators as idle youth face all types of problems, including in the case of girls, greater risk of pregnancy and sexual violence, and in the case of boys, greater risk of conscription into violence and crime. What this means is that COVID-19 restrictions are having a huge negative impact in South Sudan, hitting vulnerable communities where it hurts most, in the household economy and in their social relationships. Ironically, these are precisely where resilience is rooted. Next slide. When asked, do institutions in your community have the resources to respond to shocks, institutional respondents feel that there are adequate human resources and adequate evidence in place to respond to all categories of shock. But financial and material resources are lacking, particularly as we move from UN agencies through international NGOs to national NGOs, and to local and community-based organizations. Generally, respondents, including UN agencies, deem tools and technologies to be the least accessible resource. Furthermore, while economic shocks are across the board seen as the most impactful of all, respondents do not think that these as do other shocks. Next slide. Next slide, please. In addition to the 4 buckets of evidence just discussed, the institutional mapping exercise also produced detailed shock response maps, which enable us to see how the PFRR as a shock response system can be strengthened through targeted investments in institutional capacities. The map displayed here is a visualization of the institutions working to mitigate and respond to shocks. In this graphic, every circle represents an institutional category, sized by a number of institutions in that category. Every line represents a relationship between 2 institutional categories. As you can see, this aggregate view looks like a big, confusing ball of rubber bands. But what is important is the information that we can reveal when we start to unpack this map by applying different filters. Next slide. For example, this is a shock response network map in a wheel, looking specifically at who agrees with whom and who disagrees with whom on how to respond to economic shocks. The purpose in this presentation is not to analyze and present the actual meaning of these, but just to show you the types of information that are available in these maps. Next slide. We can also filter by institutional views. For example, here we show 2 maps of the state level government in WOW, which you see in the center of the maps, for economic shocks specifically, and from 2 vantage points. On the left, you see agreement on how to respond to economic shocks, and you can see the different types of relationships with respect to agreement that the state level government has with a host of different institutional categories. And on the right, you can see a similar map. However, this one is what we call an influencer map, which shows who seeks information, or in other words, who consults with whom before making decisions in response to specific types of shock. So here you can see who the state government in this area is, in WOW actually is consulting with, and to what level they are agreeing. Next slide. This year's ALF, as you can see, seriously considered the guidance from the last 2 annual learning forums, particularly the advice from FAO and WFP. The process this year has been community-led, field-based, and evidence-driven. It's also featured the very strong coordination of the task force, which the steering committee established and which was chaired by the Netherlands. Also, support from the PFR Secretariat, chaired by the UN Resident Coordinator's Office, allowed for a heightened level of coordination between Juba and the field, where the area reference groups played a key role. As WFP advised, together, we went to the communities, listened to their aspirations, and are now trying to amplify their voice and their agency so that partners can more easily converge their resources and efforts around community resilience priorities. We'd like to thank USAID for the financial investment that made this backbone support possible. I'd like now to highlight a storyline that is emerging from the evidence we've considered. Communities are built upon a social fabric that underlies resilience. In South Sudan, economic shocks are tearing at this fabric, with devastating ripple effects on households and communities across all 4 partnership areas. The COVID-19 restrictions intensified an already desperate situation for many households. The PFRR is trying to build household and community resilience within this current reality. While we don't know how long the restrictions will last, we do know that economic solutions, if creatively designed, can mend the social fabric and strengthen resilience in the process. This makes supporting programs that strengthen household and community economics a strategic anchor for convergence that cannot wait for COVID to disappear. Convergence, like resilience, has a technical definition, but as you saw in the stories, it also is a very basic concept that's rooted in very basic realities of local initiative. The popular story of stone soup can help us unpack what it means in practice. Hungry and weary, two travelers pass through a village. But rather than welcome them, the villagers shut their blinds and close their doors, conscious that they must conserve what little they have in a time of scarcity. So the travelers cook a stone in a pot in the town square. Eyes peep through blinds as villagers become curious about the soup. Word goes around the village. There is a feast in the making. One by one, they come out with a carrot here, a radish there, some potatoes, some salt, whatever they have to share so they too can participate in this great feast. And before you know it, the stone soup turns into an actual stew as all the resources of the village converge. I think we can apply this story to the challenge before the PFRR. It's true, when we look at the scale of the resilience challenge, the available resources look scarce. But when we factor in the systemic power of cooperation, recognizing the vast human and institutional resources that, as the institutional maps have shown us, communities actually have in South Sudan, we can confidently adopt a mindset of abundance that turns competition into collaboration. In simple terms, this mindset shift is the first value proposition of the PFRR. Thank you. That ends the presentation. Next slide, please. And I'm happy to hand the floor over to my friend Christopher Muchiri Murenga, who is the UNMISS Head of Field Office in Yambio and also serves as the chair of the Yambio Area Reference Group. He is going to moderate today a panel discussion on community experiences in a complex shock environment. Christopher?
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. In this session, I think we are now going to learn about the priorities that the communities developed through this process that was carried out by the area reference groups together with the Policy Link and with the support of the Annual Learning Forum Task Force. Since the launch of the partnership in Yambio in October of 2018, I mean, I've seen this partnership grow in leaps and bounds. I think there's a presentation that was supposed to be put on, but anyway, we can crack on as they look for it. Personally, the partnership for us here in Yambio, and as well as for colleagues of mine in the other three partnership areas that we're with in this annual learning forum, it's been a learning experience, but it's also been extremely fulfilling. We have worked hard and together with the communities, with the partners, in order to come together and try and get all the bits and pieces that actually make the partnership work through cooperation, through coordination, and as has been said by a few of the speakers before, heading towards convergence. One of the fundamental changes that we have seen has been the shift from, as was said at the beginning, from donors talking to donors to one now where it's communities, the implementers, and the donors talking together. This year has also seen a very welcome bottom-up approach where the communities and the area reference groups, with the help of PolicyLink and the Annual Learning Forum Task Force, prepared and led the process of this particular Annual Learning Forum. The ARGs, the Secretariat, the PFRR Secretariat, and the ALF Task Force and PolicyLink worked together to ensure that this forum was one, field-led, two, evidence-driven through the institutional mapping process that has been outlined before, just now by Daniel, and was community-based because there were town halls and face-to-face deliberations and also a delegates orientation workshop. And all of this brought the whole process of learning and identifying the priorities together for everyone. As you heard from Kito and Daniel, the institutional mapping gathered the evidence from the communities, and the partnership. This looked at both the partnership, it looked at the community stresses and the shocks, it looked at coordination and the cooperation between communities, implementers, and other partners, as well as looking at areas for improvement and for convergence. The face-to-face deliberations then brought the Community Development Committee representatives together to identify and discuss the key priorities under each of the pillars: rebuilding trust in people and institutions, re-establishing access to basic services, restoring productive capacity, and nurturing effective partnership. The partnership, this shows that the partnership is now firmly anchored and has very strong ownership and support in the communities. These grassroots consultations provide and ensure that the priorities are those that are considered the most important to drive catalytic impacts and also build resilience within the communities themselves. And this is with the communities as we look at them in the area reference groups, from the BOMAs to the PIAM to the county level, and therefore the community of the state as a whole. The priorities are considered what are most are community owned and they're community supported. So they're now at a point which will make it easier for all of us to be able to work together with the communities so that we can contribute what we can to realizing these priorities. I think we can now go over to the delegates in the 4 areas to present the priorities. Over to you for the presentations.
Revitalized transitional states and national government representative of the Republic of South Sudan, Partnership for Recovery and Resilience Leadership, UN agencies, international NGOs, national and civil society organizations, traditional authority leaders, faith-based organizations and religious leaders, private sector representatives, ladies and gentlemen. In order to understand and appreciate the Wilson County delegation's presentation on the PFRR, briefly allow me to take you through the 2019 flood shock, which impacted several neighborhoods in Awil Town and parts of Awil West County. While everyone was asleep, in the early hours of June 6, 2019, approximately at 2 a.m., heavy rainfall poured till 6 a.m. As a result, 3,236 houses were overflooded in 13 neighborhoods in areas such as Lonaware, Namlao, Gabat, Malwilakong, etc. 4 children and 1 elderly man drowned, heavy losses on property sustained, and thousands displaced. This event ignited a spontaneous response which brought together the 4 corners of the communities, the national NGOs, international NGOs, and UN agencies to rescue the victims. Young people and adult able swimmers helped to remove children, women, elderly out of the rising waters. Loudspeakers were deployed on a vehicle through the Ministry of Information to alert public and mobilize support. Community members voluntarily dug water drainage way to ease the flooding. The government deployed an excavator to divert flood waters. 2 trucks came to help move people to high ground, and police arrived to protect civilian properties from being stolen. The private sector and the general public donated 200 bags of sorghum and an additional food and non-food items, while others hosted relatives. On the same note, the international community met the local community at the junction of the response in coordination with the RRC. To mention a few, South Sudan Red Cross supported the victim with non-food items. WFP provided emergency food, NRC with NFI and shelter, seeds with wash items, and FAO with seeds for recovery. Further, UNDP is currently building a 10-kilometer dike to support flood resilience. That is our history. This is who we are. In the same spirit, the ongoing PFRR program, through participatory consultative meetings such as the institutional mapping, town health sense-making workshop, face-to-face meeting, and the pre-ALF workshop, the community identified and ranked their priorities in an inclusive process. However, for the purpose of this meeting, we highlighted the following 4 top priorities as categorized in the 4 pillars. Pillar 1, rebuild trust in people and institutions. Dissemination of South Sudan Land Act 2009 to the community at the grassroots level so that people understand their rights and responsibilities in order not to infringe someone else's rights. Pillar 2, re-establish access to basic services. A school should be reopened while adhering to Ministry of Health and World Health Organization COVID-19 guidelines and protocols, and learning done in shifts, morning and afternoon, to avoid overcrowding. Pillar 3, restore productive capacities. To increase agricultural productivity, improve food security and livelihood employment opportunities in Awil Santa County, the government and partners should support irrigation farming, for instance, restoration of the Awil Rice Scheme. Pillar 4, nurture effective partnership. To enable joint planning and implementation of the PFRR, regular joint collaborative meetings with the stakeholders should be held at the county level. Thank you for listening.
Okay, I'm Dr. Margaret Ito from Eastern Equatoria State, Torit. I'm also presenting the private sector in this forum. I'm going to present on the community resilience story. With devastating flood and complexities of COVID-19 last year, farmers were cut off access to market for seeds and tools due to COVID-19 lockdown. This includes farmers groups such as Full Gospel Rice Farming in Torit, Lafon, Atek Kilwak in Magui Obo, and other areas. However, many farmers came into groups to increase their capacity to respond to flood. By digging dikes, they consulted agri-farms such as Afroganics, which is a private sector company, for technical advice, seeds, and tools. With this initiative, farmers increased production, which resulted into surplus in green belt zones. But the farmers lack capacity to transport this produce to regional market. They also lack techniques to turn the produce to products and so forth. And other challenges such as poor storage and road facilities. The process to prioritize the 4 pillars, to give priorities to 4 pillars, took this length. It took a very participatory process for the 4 corners of local communities, that is to say, private sector, civil society, traditional authority, local and state government to arrive at these 4 pillar priorities. The process was facilitated by USAID, PolicyLink, and Torit PFRR ARGs. First, using evidence data from the community mapping, local communities gathered in a town hall meeting to suggest their actions for reducing impact of shocks. The second step was bringing on table the focal communities and ARG through a face-to-face workshop to prioritize the community suggestions for reducing impacts of shocks and enhancing resilience. And then finally, 4 pillar-based priorities were identified by the local communities in pre-ALF delegates orientation session. The priorities are like this. For pillar 1, to rebuild trust in people and institutions. The priority is implementation of the existing rule of laws at all levels to protect civilians and their properties, address crimes and human rights violations. Pillar 2, to establish access to basic services. The priority is provision of social and legal protection to GBV survivors, establishment and rehabilitation of learning spaces, hospitals, primary health care centers and units, and water and sanitation facilities. Pillar 3, to restore productive capacities. The priority is economic empowerment of women, men, and youth through provision of market-led technical vocational trainings and provision of startup kits, business grants, and microfinance soft loans. Pillar 4, to nurture effective partnership. The priority is to promote private and public sector partnership and increase access to evidence-based data for effective information sharing and decision making. These are the 4 priorities for Eastern Equatorial State. Thank you for listening.
College of Economics, Social Studies, and Department of Business Administration. I've been selected among the delegates to represent them in this annual learning forum. And it is my pleasure and honor to be one of the leading speakers in this forum. I'm very happy to join this forum whereby international communities, stakeholders, and other partners are here such that we discuss things and we learn from each other. Looking at Western Bahr Ghazat state, being one of the most peaceful states since independence, and how the community were resilient and how the state was developing, we will see how resilient the state was and the community at the same time. Western Bahr el Ghazal is one of the other states or any other state of South Sudan that was severely affected by conflict that erupted in 2013 in Juba and subsequently spread throughout South Sudan. And especially in Wau, it was most affected in the 2016 conflict that erupted in the town, in the state here, whereby it has resulted into a massive displacement among communities in the state and across the country. Most of this displacement was seen in the UN camps, where more than 36,000 IDPs took refuge there. Apart from that one, there were some refugees in the collective sites in Masna, churches, and many other places. Also, the conflict has further affected Ju River County, whereby the farmers and the cattle keepers intensified violence among themselves that have resulted into the displacement across the county and also the state. Not forgetting also Raja, being part of Wau, and by then was the capital of Loli State, was also affected with the same issues of displacement. Looking at the impact of the conflict, it has resulted into the loss of properties, loss of lives, and even loss of basic means of livelihood, how to establish a livelihood, in which community became vulnerable and exposed to poverty, that they cannot do anything, they cannot even afford to depend on themselves, rather than depending on supports that come from humanitarian organizations. Here, the opportunity came in when the country moved to sign the peace agreement that was in 2018. It has created an opportunity for the community of Western Bahr el Ghazal, where they have renewed their hope to be resilient in their respective places, starting with restoring confidence and trust among themselves and also among the authorities and the institutions, whereby they started returning back to their respective areas and started their livelihood with whatever they have in their hands. As we have seen in the face of resilient video, some of the IDPs or community members have returned to their areas and started their livelihood activities with farming at a self-reliant scale with basic tools, trying to sustain up their lives. Also not forgetting the women initiative, whereby we have seen some women who are disabled. They were creative in this moment of COVID-19, which have affected most of the communities. Those who were relying on some businesses and other things, it has curtailed those activities. But these women came out and initiated this activity by producing face masks, selling it, and become self-reliant. These are a few examples of how community responded to this shock of conflict and displacement and grabbing the opportunity to continue on with their lives. At this juncture, it is really very, very important for Western Bahr el Ghazal state to effectively join the PFFR frame such that they can move forward and become more resilient than they were even before. Therefore, in the discussions that we have with the authorities, with the local communities and the women, they were really very happy to take part in this partnership, whereby they will have a very big role to play. Looking at the challenges here is that during their resilience activity and trying to stand on their own to come up, they were faced with some challenges that they cannot on their own make it. For example, as they're doing the farming, they are faced with the challenge of tools. They are still using these traditional tools, hence there's a need to support them with modernized farming tools and also to explore other opportunities of livelihood, especially things to do with microfinance, poultry, and processing agricultural products, and many things, especially for women, because women nowadays are becoming part and parcel of economic growth at the household levels. Therefore, there is a need here that support to come in such that these people have to excel into a better productive means. Here, it will bring me now to reflect at the pillars of Partnership for Resilience. And the first pillars here talk about restoring confidence and trust. Here, the community of Western Barakazali State are looking at strengthening and nurturing a relationship between the organized forces and the community themselves, because doing so, it will now build a kind of harmonic relationship such that issues to do with crimes, sexual-based or sexual gender-based violence and harassment and other things can at least be minimized, because there will be harmony among community members. Pillar 2, we look at lobbying and implementing an integrated service delivery activities that can at least have citizens relax, and then they can go back to their respective villages and have all the access to the services that they need. Looking at pillar 3 here, which is the most important pillar, looks at how can we restore capacity, reproductive capacity building, in which we have seen that communities are producing. Yes, they are producing, but there is a need that we have to increase that capacity at different levels, starting with agriculture, animal husbandry, microfinance, and many others. Okay, there's a need to excel that. Pillar 4 here, we're looking at how best can we nurture partnership and how can we make it more stronger. Looking at partnership for resilience and recovery, the strength that we have the local organizations, that is the local CBOs and the national organizations. These are the organizations that will later on now take over from the international organizations who are operating at the national level. So there's a need to support them, to build their capacities such that they can carry out multi-sectoral activities or programs in the future. Now, having said this, I'm repeating that these are the issues that came out from the community, and it came when Policy Link came to the state and conducted institutional survey, whereby community leaders, faith-based local organizations, women and youth groups have participated, whereby they have identified issues and suggestions on how can we move on with the pillar, with the partnership for recovery and resilience. Here, the results of the institutional survey was discussed in a town hall forum, where more suggestions were also added, and then the suggestions were again thrown at the face-to-face forum, whereby the community leaders, the stakeholders came together, and they have approved all these points that were raised, and it came to it that now Western Barakazali State is ready to kick off with the Partnership for Resilience and Recovery, and we are looking out to the international community so that we can have an effective partnership. Thank you.
My name is Justin David Boki from the local government and the delegate representing Yambio Partnership area. I would like to start with a short story of how communities in Yambio Partnership area have responded to one of the recent shocks. Every year between July and October, due to the heavy rains, the Yubu Bridge, which connects Yambio, Sakure, and Buliangum communities, get covered by flood, and they block these communities from accessing farmland, basic services. In 2019, UNOPS attempted without access to fixed part of the bridge. Again, on August 15 to 17, 2020, the area received 2 days of heavy rain that caused an overflow of Yubu River, covering the Yubu Bridge and blocking access to farmland, market, education, and health facilities, destroying life and properties. The youth and the community leaders mobilized local resources, including money, which was used for buying empty sacks. The youth filled the sacks with sand and used it for building the water barriers, which temporarily allow for individuals trapped across the river to cross the river. The community reached out to the partners for support, but the support did not come. However, the government came and provided security personnel to control and regulate the movement across the river due to the risk involved in attempting to cross the river by community members. Today, the Yambio, Sakure, and Bulyangun community once again call upon partners and donors to support the reconstruction of this bridge, a critical infrastructure that provides access to farmland, market, education, and health facilities. The community is ready to contribute sand, stone, food items, security, and human resource toward the reconstruction of the bridge. This is the short story that highlights how we, the community, have come together to respond to this shock. I would like also to tell you how the community members have come together to select their top PFRR, pillar-based priorities for 2021. Following the institutional architecture for resilience survey conducted by PolicyLink in November 2020, the traditional leaders, local authority, private sector, CBOs representatives came together in town hall to review the preliminary findings. Based on the evidence presented, we discussed and suggested actions that could reduce the impact of the SOX. Identified in this study, in the face-to-face event organized by the area reference group, the community representatives set their priorities based upon the suggested action and have selected delegates to represent them in the annual learning forum. During the delegate orientation, the chosen representative further clustered their priorities around the 4 pillars of the PFRR and determined the top priority per each of the 4 pillars. The 4 top priorities are as follows. Under Pillar 1, our priority is to ensure social cohesion and reconciliation through more dedicated efforts and resources to peace-building program. Establish and strengthen traditional mechanisms and structures to ensure practical engagement in conflict mitigation and transformation at community and state level. Under Pillar 2, our priority is to improve access to and deliver quality essential services with a deliberate emphasis on quality education, health, nutrition, and wash services through strengthening capacities, training, materials, and resources of the state-relevant institutions, traditional authorities, civil society, and faith-based organization. Under Pillar 2, our priority is to support a shift from subsistence to market-oriented farming and value-added production through climate-smart agriculture and agro-industrial business development and modeling. Promotion and support for vibrant cooperatives and provision of access to microfinancing to women and youth groups, farmers organizations, and the business communities through village saving and loan, as well as small and medium enterprise funding scheme. Under Pillar 4, our priority is to strengthen coordination structure at and between institutions through capacity buildings of local and traditional authorities, civil society and faith-based organizations, private sector, and representative of youth, women, and people with special needs to engage effectively in planning, development, and implementation of socio-economic recovery and resilience building programs.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, colleagues. And this is now from these are the priorities in each of the areas, in each of the pillars that were brought together, that came out from the face-to-face meetings. So right now, as you can see, we'd like you to put in your questions and your comments into the chat box. I think what we need to do is we really need to focus during this session on the comments and the questions, on answering or supporting the expectations of the communities on how to address the priorities that they have actually provided to us. There is a common thread through these, and capacity building is there. So we need to look at that, nurturing partnerships, and looking at where the productive capacities. We're looking at the agricultural, the pastoralism, and there have been some suggestions in the comments so far. So we need to now try and find, use these 15 minutes to try and put in those questions, and we can then go into a round of questions.
Muchi, with a little bit of reluctance, we're going to cut 15 minutes to 10 to try to put ourselves back on schedule again.
All right. So for everybody, please, you can direct your questions at specific panelists, or you can look at, we can actually open it out so that at least we can get more bang for our buck in this meeting. It's been a great forum, so let's look at that. So thank you, everyone. Already, I think we have some questions coming in, so I'd like the following to prepare themselves for some of the questions. For Luca, the point has been raised, and the question is, how can intercommunal conflicts related to cattle raiding be addressed with an aim to reduce suffering of pastoral communities, especially women and children in South Sudan? And this is in relation to what can be done through the PFRR initiative. So if we can have, if you can be prepared to answer that. And then for all the panelists, from the 4 partnership areas, the participants would like additional examples of resilience activities carried out by communities with less or no support from humanitarian agencies. So it's looking at moving away from dependence on humanitarian assistance to support for recovery, development, and resilience that is community-led. And then from Daniel and for my other colleagues in the ARGs, I think we need to also look at, we have now reached the communities. Communities have chosen and have indicated the key priorities, their 4 priorities, and this is, the question is, what next? So I'd be glad to hear from some of the partners on that. While we're waiting and receiving more questions, and before we put them out there, I'd just like to thank all the partnership areas for such great presentations. It's been a lot of hard work, but it is really good to see everybody coming through. We are remembering that our focus on this in this particular year is really on communities first, but not alone, and that we are all, having gone through this whole process of the face-to-face consultations, the institutional mapping, all within the challenges of the COVID-19 pandemic. It's been really great that how everybody has pulled together to do all these within the with the constraints that have been imposed, but making sure that that we have all been safe and remain safe. And that is one thing that I'd like to stress again for everybody, that we did this maintaining those COVID-19 prevention and protection protocols and guidances, but for everybody, just remembering to stay safe. So in the 2 minutes that we have while waiting for before we go straight into the sessions where we go back to the panelists to answer some of these crucial questions that have been asked. I'd also like to say that, you know, one of the things that we've seen in this period is the strength that communities have, the coping mechanisms that have been shown by communities have been very positive, and it is now what we can do as a partnership, being the communities, the implementers, and the donors, to strengthen those coping mechanisms, and also then see how best we can make sure that sustainability is not just a part of what we say, but is part of what we do together. So I think we should be ready to start. So I think Luca. I think if you can get ready, we can look at, we can go to Luca. And the question that we have there is, you know, how can intercommunal conflicts related to cattle raiding be addressed? And this is looking with the aim to reduce suffering of pastoral communities, especially women and children in South Sudan, and looking at the PFRR, looking specifically at the PFRR initiative.
Muchiri, if you'd like me to answer one of the questions while we wait for Luca, I can take the one about what next.
Right. I think that, please go ahead, Daniel.
Okay, so great question in terms of what comes next. We do have some thoughts, but of course this is just one set of activities which will follow up the annual learning forum, but we would also encourage the concept of collective responsibility and ownership, and everyone is welcome to help us think through how to make sure all of this work actually results in convergence. But from a task force standpoint, which is the steering committee actually, there will be a proposal put forward to continue the community engagement process, which has now resulted in these community identified priorities, which have really been refined and sculpted down and elaborated, but they can go further to produce local action plans and results frameworks that are really reflective of this community initiative, continuing to build on the four-corner participation, making sure that it's inclusive, also aligning them with community-based measurements. So this is a facilitative process that will continue. That will have to align with a similar process that has been going on, led by the ARGs in each of the 4 partnership areas, the joint work planning. And so the more that we can get dialogue between the joint work plans and local community action plans, including the question of what is the local contribution to those plans, I think this is practically how we can use this as a launching pad, this ALF as a launching pad. And this is indeed the plan. If we have the type of leadership support from the steering committee that was established through the task force and the active role of the ARGs on the ground, I think it's very, very possible, because the communities are quite, their appetite is quite big for this type of engagement. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm Joseph Luca, lead speaker of our delegates. It is my pleasure to be part of this forum. I'm here to respond briefly on 2 questions that I have received from the recorded presentations that I have made. And in regard to the question 1 that talks about how cattle keepers cattle keepers or cattle raiding conflict affect women and children, how can it be addressed with the PFR? In fact, we are looking at strengthening the Marialbai agreement that was signed between the farmers and the cattle keepers, but it is lacking support in terms of dissemination, in terms of making it accessible to those who are in the field. So if we can strengthen that agreement, it can minimize. Also, there is a need for a massive disarmament among the communities in the areas, and also for the cattle communities, there is a need to dig water heifers such that they can graze around that area, and also to encourage farmers to keep on cultivating crops that the cattle can benefit from the residues. And also, we're looking at supporting traditional conflict resolution at the community, at the traditional level. How can we support them? We need to support traditional leaders to resolve conflict at their status, not to go up to the higher level. Also, not forgetting the roles that the civil society has played in dissemination, in mitigating conflicts, especially issues to do with the security sector reform. In this way, where this phenomenon can be minimized. Quickly to go to the other questions that talk about what other resilience examples that the community of WOW can do in regard to PFRR. First of all, community of WOW are basically depending on agriculture. And as I've mentioned before in the presentation, that they are doing agriculture, but at a very small scale, just self-reliant. It is continuing, they're doing it. So there are a lot of examples. For example, some of them are producing cash crops that they can sell and get other commodities. Also looking at fishing, okay, looking around Wow River or Ju River, fishing exercise is very high, and some of them bring the fish and exports to some other areas, and they are resilient from it. Also, not forgetting the women-led initiative, which is very common nowadays. That is the Women Cooperative Society, in which women from every week they used to move from one house to another, trying to contribute things, and it is really very effective. And we have seen that many women now in Wow Town, especially, and around Wow, are getting involved into these activities and many other activities that we have not yet explored. But you can see now, after the signing of this peace agreement, and IDPs are getting out of the camps, resilience is very common among themselves in whatever they are doing. These are the few things that I can commend, and also the delegates around me here, if you can see, they have contributed in answering to them. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much, Luca. That was an excellent intervention. And I'd like to now, sort of open up a question to all our colleagues from the 4 partnership areas, and taking it out just a little bit. Do we have any examples to share of the mechanisms or procedures or tools through which communities can monitor and assess the implementing partners, the delivery, and the alignment with the community priority, to see whether we can get some answers on this? I think we'll start with Awil. Yes,
thank you very much for the chance, the forum. Yes, this is Agao from Awil, the presenter on behalf of the community. I'm going to answer the question, the monitoring in place from the community. The community have already having structures in place, like the chiefs, youth, women group, and business people. Problem, and they come to respond to it. They do monitor their activities through, for example, if like the flood that happened, I have just narrated. What happened, they can contribute with the resources, can contribute with whatever every sector can contribute to come out from the problem. And then they have to make a resilience out of that, which actually they can rebuild up their houses. And being rebuilding their houses, that is itself is a sustainability mechanism that the community can do. They can do it in a supportive way, whereby people come together and they do the work collectively using the existing mechanism called NAFIR. NAFIR in our local language is where people come together and they start doing the work together. They help the vulnerable people who cannot be able to support themselves, like the youth can be mobilized and do the work. That is a kind of resilience our people do make. To do the monitoring is actually to continue doing your work and also to continue doing, keep your sustainability to the things that have been given to you, support that has been given to you, or the support that people done to you. You have to keep it very well and you build on it. So these are the few answers that I could give on behalf of the community on the ground. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think if we probably, Torit, if you've got, if you could also give us some insight on what you would do in that respect, or what you think we can do in that respect.
Thank you very much. This is Dr. Margaret Ito. I would like to say first, this has been really a bottom-up approach where our communities identified the issues, their priorities. Surely, with the structures already existing, because we involve even the traditional structures, and even a plan of strengthening the community development committees at the grassroots level. And this will be all for the process of being able to monitor the activities. The local communities, to some extent, they have also provided local resources. I believe the monitoring, together with the support of our partners, that monitoring extent with the training, the community will eventually be able to. But this has been really a bottom-up approach, and it is an excellent approach to me. There is a question, since I'm here already, a question which I felt was not also need additional answer. That came up by saying that from the examples we gave on resilience, whether there are other examples for resilience in our areas. Can I add that?
Yes, please, go ahead. Please go ahead, Doctor.
Yes. Are there already groups of women and young men? For example, there are groups who are making like bed sheets together and they sell. They make bags out of beads also, necklaces and braid. Even the VSLA, which was already mentioned, something in Arabic is called sandu. I think this is already an example which our communities are moving towards really strengthening themselves. I could also see young people laying bricks in groups. This is already a sign of coming together. I think still they may need to identify more activities that will make them busy and also earn a living. So I think we are on the right path. Rome is not built on one day, but eventually we shall reach with our communities there. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much for that, Doctor. I'd like to change it up a bit, and for WOW and Yambio, I'd like to ask this question. From the work that's being done in the partnership areas here, how can we support monitoring and the design and implementation of programs? We'd like to sort of try and identify the strategies that would help monitoring and evaluation, then help the feedback loop into the design and implementation of programs. So we start with let's start with Yambio and then go to WOW, please.
Thank you. This is Victoria from Yambio. Based on the actual thing that we have been doing, we are looking at the structures at the PFRR, that is the State Steering Committee, the CDCs at all levels, at BOMA, PAYAM, and the county level. These are structures put in place to support monitoring and evaluation. When we look at the Nexus, which is the Network for Civil Society Organization, which is basically from the community, they have already 4 clusters per the 4 pillars. And what we are doing is to collect information, feedbacks from the community on the implementation done at each level. Is it according to the plan or it is diverted? Are they satisfied with it or not? So we get the feedback and then we report to the coordinator, state coordinator, who will later take it at the high level steering committee. These are the mechanisms for monitoring and evaluations. So in addition to the other question of what else have we been doing without support from partners, to be sincere, there are many organizations here, especially civil society, and let me be specific. Nile Sisters Development Initiative is one of the organizations, since it has been formed up to date, has never received any funding from partners. But as we talk, we have trained 30 women already on bread making with the funding from staff contribution from their pocket. And it has helped that women group. We have been calling them, training them on GBV, leadership, with the contribution even from the community. What they do is they mobilize local resources like the food items. Then for us, we bring the facilitator, we hire the facilitator from another civil society to come and support if we don't have materials in that area. And then we conduct a full day training to build their leadership. There is another women group which has dug their fish pond alone by themselves, and it is now sustaining their lives. What they did, which was lacking only, was the young fish, which are not available in Yambio. To get them was not easy. They have to seek support from World Vision, and they were supplied with young fish. As I talk now, they have saved more than 1,000 US dollars. These are the evidences we have from communities. I think up to here. I don't know which other question I've not tackled. There was this question on what are the strategies put by the community to mobilize the local resources, which was by Rusom. The community already have existing structure. The traditional leaders are there and they have laid the action plan, especially for the Yubu Bridge. There is a plan which looks at how the traditional leaders can mobilize the human resource, categorize them in two phases of actions, because others will be collecting the finance, looking at the financial part of it, those for the in-kind contribution, and then those for the hard labor at the site, and what are the local materials available in that community to support the project. That's why you see there is a sand in River Uze, there is a stone, and then the way forward is only some of the things that are not from the community, like the culvert, the technical skills, the engineer to work on the bridge. These are the strategies already put in place by the community in case partners are going to support reconstruction of the bridge. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Victoria, and also for those two incredible stories that you just shared. Can I go to Wow now?
I'm here.
Yes, go ahead.
Thank you very much. Yeah, thank you very much. In regard to the question, I would just like to go and answer it directly. I would like first to start with the theme of the PFR this year, that is community first, but not alone. So in regard to the tool of monitoring the projects, we are putting the community in the center of monitoring to be the body that monitors the programs. Here also, mechanism or joint monitoring analysis to be the body that collects information, analyze and share it, such that information they can decide on what could be done. So that joint body brings together the community, the traditional leaders, the governments, the international community, including the local.
Sorry.
You see? So it forms a complete body that monitors and analyzes and then provide information that can be shared by all the stakeholders. Looking at other mechanisms that we have here currently now, are you getting? Hello? Hello?
Yeah, hi. Yes, hi. I think we have a bit of a problem with the sound. Maybe if you could put those your thoughts into the chat, and then we will pick them up from there, and also everybody would be able to see them. But as we're getting into a bit of a problem with time, and I'd like to actually ask a question, 1 minute, 1 to 2 minutes for each of the partnership areas on, are there any instances where community-led resilience initiatives have become a source of contention or conflict? And we'll start with Awil.
Thank you again, Christopher. In a will, I don't think that some of the resilient program can be a conflict with the community. I've not seen that. Because community normally, what's bringing them both to respond and be resilient, it is something that they benefit from it, not to bring the conflict to them. And as you people know, will is relatively peaceful always, and the conflicts are actually limited. It can be only the issue of land, but also it cannot bring up to this level of conflict. So the resilient program are helpful and not bringing conflict. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that. If we go to Torit.
Yeah, thank you very much. This is Torit, Dr. Margaret Ito again. I would like to say, really, I don't see any source of conflict to activities on resilience because most of the conflict are resource-based, majority. But if there are activities that will earn more livelihood to the communities, I think this will make them very happy. As my colleague had mentioned earlier, land usually is one of the sources of conflict. But if, for example, if there is a group farming and the communities usually sit with their leaders, as we said also, in this program, the already involvement of the traditional authorities, I don't see any source of conflict there. So if the approach is clear, there is no source of conflict.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ito. That's quite clear. Wow, could we have your take on that particular question on whether there have been instances where community initiatives have actually have led to or become a source of contention or conflict? Sorry, we seem to have a problem with connection from WOW.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can. Go ahead, please. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yeah, we are having some problem with the volume. In regard to that question, remember I've talked about the Montreal agreement that was between the cattle keepers and the farmers. So you see, in the course of this, the lack of trust and confidence among themselves, they took it negatively and they've rejected, and it turned out to be a conflict by itself when the initiative was good, and it resulted into some of the partners have been intimidated or even arrested. So these are some of the things that is why to see how best you can address them.
Thank you very much for that. Yambio?
Okay, I was saying the Yambio community initiatives have not resulted in any conflict, as we can learn from the past story of the peace that was initiated by the community between the government and the SSLM and the forces in Ilirongu. It ended in a peaceful cohesion and integration of those forces into the government system. So it did not bring any problem. We also have the Nzara Yambio Road, which has been filled by the youth, by the community youth, which is supporting movement now between Zara and Yambio. It has not caused any conflict in any way, and many other initiatives. So since it is a community driven and agreed by everyone, people peacefully contribute and achieve the goal. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And as we come to wrap up this particular session, I'd like to go back to Daniel, and I hope, Daniel, you don't think this is me throwing you under the bus, but it's just a question that I think, based on, from all the stories that we've been hearing and all the responses to the questions, and also the commentary that's been in the chat, how can the PFRR platform help each of these community areas, help the communities gain support from the donors? If you could just give us a brief views on that, please.
Okay, thank you, Muchiri. I actually appreciate the question, and I would answer it in relation to the design of the PFRR itself. I think the design of the PFRR provides avenues for participation for all of those who are concerned, no matter where they happen to sit. And also the processes that connect those structures have a logic to them. And so on the one hand, we've heard our co-chairs advise us actually instructively over the years. I remember the first annual learning forum, the second annual learning forum, that we have to also respect the organic nature of organization in each partnership area. We can't be too prescriptive about how communities choose to organize themselves. And at the same time, there are structures within the PFRR that exist for a reason. So what I would say is, if we can kind of balance that organic coming together, how communities organize themselves, with participation through these structures that exist, it can unlock a lot of value, and it can make it easier for the donors to support these community initiatives. Specifically at a local level, we're looking at things like, we heard, I think Dr. Ito it was who mentioned the CDCs, the community development committees, and reactivating those. There's also the Inclusive Champions Group, which are also active at varying levels in the partnership areas. Within there's also the avenue for participation through the ARGs. And I think that's the first thing, is really strengthening that engagement between the ARGs and these various community-based institutions. So what does that mean? It means really the joint work planning, making sure that your priorities are aligned, making sure that you're talking to one another, making sure that you are speaking with a common voice from the partnership area to Juba and beyond. So what does it mean to speak with a common voice? There are structures to be spoken to. I think the example of the ARGs participating in the task force has been exceptional. It's something we have to build upon. And there are other structures like the JAMG for monitoring and evaluation, and the TEG for the technical work. I would suggest that the ARGs, with a strong participation of the local communities, representing their joint work plans, need to participate at a Juba level. They need to make those priorities known. And of course, those entities exist under the steering committee, who works closely with the donor working group. So I would just encourage us all to really look at the logic behind the design of the PFRR, engage organically, but also through the structures that exist. And it's not easy by any stretch, and there's also the issue of delayed gratification. But if we were to do it, I believe that the PFR as a platform could make it easier for the donors to support the partnership areas. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Daniel. And I think the key takeaways, I think, from just what you've said, and it's actually very important, looking at the logic of the framework of the PFRR. and the way it has been working over the last 3 years. So it's been, as I said in the beginning, looking at first donors talking to donors, and the conversations were really donors and implementing partners, and then this has gradually morphed into and become a very strong community driven and also community advised process, so that now it's the community and the donors and the implementers all having a conversation together. And I think this is one of the things that is a key progress in the Partnership for Recovery and Resilience. And for me, one of the main indicators of this is how the process of putting together this annual learning forum has been. It has been grassroots up, and also guidance from up down to the grassroots. So there was a two-way conversation. And this to me is one of the main areas of strengthening that we need to engage in. All the partnership areas very, very strongly came up with the priorities that they have. And these priorities are what we need to now address and find ways of supporting. They're the 4 priorities each partnership area has presented here, but in the formulation of those, there were a whole host of other priorities within each of the 4 pillars in each of the partnership areas that have been shared, and these will be shared again through the forum, through the partnership mechanism itself, so that we are all sure of where we're going. One of the other takeaways I got is we talk about recovery and resilience, but one of the fundamental building blocks that I have seen is the resilience of the partnership itself. There's resilience in the communities, but there's also been resilience in the partnership in being able to work, especially as we look at this, the whole, this session has all been talking about, or rather this annual learning forum has been looking at communities responding to COVID-19 in complex shock environments. But the partnership itself has had to respond in COVID-19 challenging circumstances, and has actually shown the resilience to be able to go forward. This is one of the things that then shows you that having that effective partnership between the communities and the partners working to the implementing partners working in those communities, and with the donors, all of that coming together makes for a very, very strong working environment. As Daniel just pointed out, the joint work planning is something that is going to be very important. It has been driving the partnership going forward, but I think it is going to be much stronger now. And this is going to be extremely necessary to ensure convergence, which the next sessions will be talking about. And in order to do this, we need to strengthen that engagement horizontally and vertically. We've got to make sure that that the conversation is a conversation and it is two-way, and that we look at the points where we have convergence. We want to be sure that that these community priorities that have been provided here from the face-to-face deliberations that were held in the partnership areas we will now see some practical examples of convergence from the partners, both international and local, and how we have assisted the communities move forward with the priorities that they have brought forward. This includes supporting flexibility in programming and launching other complementary activities, as was mentioned by the co-chairs at the beginning of this annual learning event. It's something that is, the flexibility has to be there, the increase in advocacy, and making sure that there's that agility in the delivery and in the development of the initiatives, as well as in delivering and in implementing. So as we go forward, we will look at how all this can be done. One thing that we do know is that there are a lot of questions and a lot of comments that have come up in the chat. The chat has been on fire. So we will answer all the questions that have not been responded to adequately in this session, but there will be responses to the questions after the event, and also as we come up with the final results from this annual learning forum. I'd like to just say this has been an amazing session. I'd like to thank the partnership areas and the presenters, the delegates from AWIL, from Torit, from WOW, and also from Yambio, for being such amazing people and being such they've done a lot of work in this, and without all of you in the annual learning forum task force, Policy Link, my colleagues in the ARGs, and the delegates from the communities, the representatives of those community development committees, we wouldn't have had such an amazing experience. So I'd like to thank all of you for this, and I will hand over to you, Larry, for the next session.
Well,
thank you.
I have to say, being part of that session was genuinely an honor. It was genuinely an honor. As somebody who tunes into this once a year, so I was there for 2018, I was there for 2019, here I am today, and I hope you'll take this the right way. It feels like a loving uncle who comes back and visits the family. And it's just remarkable to watch the growth. It's a beautiful thing. I'm gonna tell you something from what I said at the end of the last session, which was the very end of 2019. I said I thought there were 5 different challenges that were being faced by the partnership, each one of them great. The first was the challenge of partnership at the local level and at the national and global level. The second was the challenge of community, again, at the local level and at the national and global level. The third was the challenge of engagement between those communities at all of those levels. The fourth was the challenge of measurement and analysis. And the fifth was the challenge of turning all of this into programming. I'm going to do something I wouldn't usually do. I'm going to post my written comments from last time in the chat box, because I want you to see how far things have moved from a year ago then till now. Most of those challenges now have an element of reality. It's not just aspirational, they're real things happening on the ground, and many challenges remain ahead. I'm particularly impressed with what the communities have done, but I'm impressed as well by the willingness of the donors to listen to what the communities are saying. To me, the challenges that we're going to talk about tomorrow, and I hope tomorrow we will not just congratulate ourselves, but we'll challenge ourselves. The challenges we'll focus on tomorrow are in fact the challenges of engagement and the challenges of programming. Namely, now that we've come to respect each other and listen to each other, how do we really work together, given all the constraints the donors have, practical constraints, and all of the pressures on communities? How do we truly come together in a concrete way? And how does that turn into realities on the ground? that respect, don't overtake the community first, but make it really clear that the communities have a partner in what's going ahead. That's very strong language, communities first, but not alone. I think our job now is to make it a reality. That's going to bring us to the end of today's session. But before any of you hang up, I want to tell you about a little bit about tomorrow and a little bit about what's going to happen at the end of today for those of you who want to remain. So tomorrow is going to pick up where we left off, but we're going to take these challenges that were put on the table today, the examples that were put on the table today, the community first perspective that was so prevalent today, and we're going to try to reflect that, beginning, middle, and end of a conversation tomorrow about what do we do going from here. We're going to use that word convergence as a way to try to describe and to organize what it really means for these pieces to come together in a practical way. So for some of you who have thoughts about how that should look, and if you haven't spoken those thoughts yet, be ready to speak them tomorrow. Before that, today, we have one more substantive session. It's a little different than the ones we've been listening to. We believe it'll be interesting to many of you, perhaps not all of you. I'm going to tell you a little bit about it and invite those of you who are interested to please stay on the line for the session. For those of you who think it's not for you, we wish you a very lovely evening, and we'll look forward to seeing you tomorrow morning, the same time we saw you today. So let me now introduce the upcoming session. Say a good night to those of you who are leaving us. Say a welcome again to those of you who are going to be joining us and remaining. So this is a session about cost-benefit analysis. For those of you who don't relate to that technical language, it means how to figure out what's the best way to spend the money that we have. And we have three very distinguished people who've been doing academic work on this, and they're going to try to make that work as practical as possible for the rest of us who are not economists, but who are very interested in the question that they're raising. You see on the screen in front of you, Mark Anthony Consis from Cornell University, who led this work and is going to be talking about some of the results of the research and some of the implications that has for the ongoing resilience work in South Sudan. He's joined by two other people who were researchers with him, but come from different institutions. John Ulimwengo is the Senior Research Fellow at the International Policy Research Institute, and he works on agricultural productivity and poverty reduction. And Mark Errico is an economist at the Food and Agricultural Organization, where he's responsible for something called the REMA team that he'll explain to you, and the Impact Evaluation Task Force. I'm going to hand it over to them to both present some results and take your questions. And I hope you'll find it as interesting as I did when I heard a preview of it yesterday. Over to you, Mark.
Very good. Okay, thank you for that introduction. Very good. So I will continue, and I'll first say that, as my colleagues know, I'm not fond of the spotlight, and their pictures should be on the cover page as well, though we didn't specify that. In many ways, I'm third to their first, second position on this work. But before beginning and going on to the detail of this preamble, I'd like to say a few things. First of all, it's a privilege to be here. It's really impressive to be part of this morning session. I've been here since the beginning, and as someone with in the COVID situation, not able to travel to South Sudan and to the partnership areas, it's been wonderfully enlightening. So thank you all for the presentations and being invited to this first day. Secondly, and again, even before preamble to the preamble, to say as we go on here, is that our work fits within at least two of the pillars, certainly within, you'll see moving on, within reestablishing basic services. And also, it moves us in the direction and makes us think about the partnership pillar as well. And I'll come back to this point later. So as a preamble to our work, and even before giving you a broad overview of what we'll talk about in the next half hour, followed by time for discussion, where it's proven to be very fruitful this morning, is I'd like to just begin with the question, to what problem is cost-benefit analysis the solution? And there really are three problems: focusing on investment levels, determining how much is enough. And while funding to communities and countries are often described in terms of investments, it is usually difficult to determine the ideal level of investment or describe the consequence of different investment scenarios. And that's really critically important. And we think about the way in which donors manage their funds, and then how people on the ground in partnership areas actually make use of those funds. Efficiencies and should be an important consideration. The second problem is dealing with perennial and seems ever-present resource limitations. And we believe that cost-benefit analysis approaches provide you with a good strategy for requesting resources. Provides an evidence-based approach to demonstrate the consequences of insufficient funding. Poor funding, it doesn't just limit programs, it has serious effects on the lives of individuals, even resulting in mortality in its most extreme form. So developing arguments and being able to demonstrate what insufficient costs actually do to beneficiaries, to programs, to areas, to populations is really critical and compelling. And thirdly, managing multiple programs. Even thinking about PFRR, there are 4 pillars and there are a number of work streams. What's the most efficient and effective way to manage resources over those pillars, get the best result? And so cost-benefit analysis can inform decisions about how best to allocate funds across multiple programs, across areas. And I kind of put this last piece in here in the box because if you can stay back in the last one, please, go to the previous slide, is I like to view cost-benefit analysis as a community-based empowerment strategy. This is something that came up in my discussion with the organizing team the other day. I think it's really important to think about this question: how can we invert the power relationship that determines who gets funded for what over what duration? And I think typically funding decisions are made top down. And I think if we do cost-benefit analysis at a community level, we actually can help invert the power structure. And this is to the benefit of donors who want to spend their money most efficiently. Okay, next slide, please. So what I'm going to talk about now, and this is a bit of a digression here, is to introduce READY. The work we're doing is underneath on the umbrella of the Resilience Evidence for Decisions and Development Initiative. So I want to introduce that very briefly, then we'll quickly pivot to the cost-benefit analysis study, talk about the topic of research, the empirical platform, methodology and finding, and reserving a good amount of time for questions and discussion. So next slide, please. Oh, I think something happened there. We can keep going. Not on the slide, but I think there must be an animation in there. Great. I think one more animation. Sorry about that. You can just reveal the whole thing. And probably one more. Okay. So I just want to introduce resilience here, which everyone is very familiar with, is that resilience in the work we do highlights the positive capacity to anticipate, prepare for, and recover from shocks and stressors to prevent households and communities from suffering long-term adverse consequences. This is from USAID's guidance, and I think everyone in this meeting certainly is familiar with this. And just want to have this slide here just to show that there's really as you're all aware, broad set of efforts that go along with resilience. Next slide, please. Okay. So our early work in resiliency measurement was of this type. Apologize for animation. I usually have control. We developed work on theories of resilience measurement, frameworks, data sources, context, shocks, focus, systems analyses. I put these out here, one for resources, and also as a partial confession that our previous work that was done was primarily technical and theoretical, but it wasn't well grounded in policies and context with programs. And that's what READY is meant to do. So if you can go to the next slide. please. So the work of READY is looks at 3 problems and 3 questions. One is we want to alter a view of what counts as measurement rigor, what counts as effective measurement. The current situation is that measurement rigor is defined in technical terms, and we don't think enough about the utility of evidence. Secondly, we don't incorporate stakeholder views, and we need to think more carefully about what drives demand for evidence. The work by Policy Link, Daniel's work is a great example of bringing stakeholder views into closer conversation with measurement activities. And there's a proliferation of tools and approaches. How can one choose among tools? Right now, there's a wide array of tools, data analytical approaches, and how can one choose? It's almost a curse of riches here. Next slide. Oh, so READY strategic goals is 1, redefine what counts as strong evidence, be more responsive to measurement, and then try to develop, promote harmonized measurement. Very good. Next, please. So READY strategic work, and this is the last slide before we get to cost benefit, is how do we do our work, or second to last slide. 1 is we focus on the demand for evidence. We examine the content of resilience policies and programs. We have done work with PFRR, looking at the pillars and work streams and trying to understand what evidence is needed to support the work of PFRR. Measurement tools, we review resilience measurement tools to try to help audiences make selections of the various tools that are available in data sets, which moves to point 3, identify and consolidate resilience data, and then 4, the harmonization effort. Next slide. You can go to next, yeah. So where we are right now, we're doing work in South Sudan and also in Kenya. And we've done an initial scoping study about a year ago, reviewed PFRR. We've begun to work on private sector partnership in Yambio with the Green Equatoria Tea Company. I see Ian is on this call, and he's been involved with that, as has Phil Fong been facilitating that, and Alem was also involved. And we've done the cost benefit analysis. We've been engaged in that. And we're also reviewing measurement tools. In Kenya, just as background, not relevant to here, we're doing work on a new policy platform. We're actually in office within Kenya on the strategic, on STDA, which is a strategic drought. I've forgotten the acronym now, I'm sorry, in Kenya. So next slide. So that's READY. That's a quick introduction to READY. What we'll do now is pivot over to talk about the cost benefit analysis study, going back to where it began. I've told you a little bit about the motivation, and let's go forward here. I'll say a little more. Next slide. Okay. So the main motivation is to apply cost benefit perspective to resilience analysis. A lot's been done in resilience measurement, resilience monitoring. There's not been so much done on applying cost benefit analysis to that. We want to apply cost benefit analysis, BAR, as an empirically and practically viable tool. And we use it to assess the impact that varied level of investments in resilience capacities might have on food security outcomes and on resilience capacities themselves. We think this is significant for 2 reasons. 1, practically, provides evidence on the effect of different investment levels. Secondly, supports evidence-based program planning and decision-making about how best to allocate those resources. And methodologically, we believe that cost-benefit analysis should be incorporated into resilience analysis. I would argue that it perhaps more vigorously is we should have cost-benefit analysis in all the work we do, but we can come back to that at the end. And I think the importance of that is that we just have scarce resources and we need to spend those dollars most effectively. Methodologically, the aim is to develop a tool that could be broadly applied to resilience for different interventions across settings. Next slide. So the background study, just giving an overview. I'm going to pass this to Marco Dorico. So I will mute and you can ask Marco to unmute. He's going to describe REMA, which was Larry mentioned at the outset, which is resilience index measurement and analysis, which describes what is measured. We introduce a conceptual framework and describe the data. I mean, this really is grist for the discussion mill. We need to go through this, and for those who aren't so interested in technical details, we apologize for it, but we do want to give some background without numbing the mind for those who aren't interested in this. So I'll pass this to Marco. Thank you.
Well, good afternoon to everyone. Thank you for your time and attention. I've been following the entire session, and I'm always convinced of how important and interesting it is to be part of this. And, I have a long-lasting relationship with South Sudan, so I care of South Sudan a lot, and I care of all the activities done under the PFRR. So, okay, I will briefly guide you through the RIMA, what it is, and the type of data that we're using. We don't intend to spend too much time on the technical details. Therefore, I will be, let me say, quite superficial on this. But I will be, of course, very happy to respond to specific questions in case there is any. If you can kindly move to the next slide, please. Next slide, thanks. So RIMA stands for Resilience Index Measurement and Analysis. It's an approach to measure resilience, which is based on a quantitative approach to put together a number of different aspects of resilience. So, yeah, so there is you know, there is a number of different approaches to measure resilience, and what we are using is basically to combine different indicators of resilience together so that they can give finally a resilience capacity index. So the idea is to measure directly aspects of resilience like access to basic services, asset, social safety nets, and adaptive capacity. We now tend to use this sensitivity aspect, which we call now shocks, as an exogenous aspect of changes in resilience capacity. We measure this directly, like access to school, access to health centers, access to water, access to electricity. We are mentioning here a few examples of what we can consider as indicators of resilience. We, for instance, measure access to productive and non-productive assets like income or other non-productive assets. And then we use also cash transfers, formal and informal remittances. And finally, as a productive capacity, we tend to consider aspects like number of income sources, level of education, and degrees of flexibility in adapting to new situations. And then we combine them together. That's overall the approach of RIMA, so a quantitative approach. Please, if you can move to the next slide. Thanks. So basically, that's our logical framework. We combine different aspects, as I said, of resilience. And we think, if you look at this framework, you have basically two moments. The first on the left is the moment before a shock can occur. And then the second moment after the shock occurs is on the right side of this framework. In the between, what happens? Well, a shock may happen and a set of coping strategies may enter into action, which comes from consumption smoothing, asset smoothing, or the adoption of new livelihoods. Of course, that's exactly what we want to understand. So what happens when a shock, like a drought, a flood, a conflict, a disease, the death of one member of the household, or any other type of shock, natural shock, man-induced shock, whatever else is of relevance, affects all the resilience capacity of a household. How do the household cope with this? And what is the intervention? And what is the effect of the intervention? And how this intervention and the assistance provided, the integrated assistance or the specific assistance or the multi-sector intervention can affect and translate into a re-established capacities to resist to a shock, which is what we then have on the right side of this framework, which basically means how do am I still capable of making a living? Am I still capable of meeting my food security requirements? Am I still capable of resisting additional shocks that might occur. For doing this, as I said, we put together a number of different data that we collect in the field. Next slide, please. Okay, so in the case of the exercise that we are doing, that we run with Mark and John, we've been making use of a large set of data sets that FAO, together with other partners, have been collecting over time in South Sudan. So in particularly, we've been using a set of data sets that are available that, as you can see, ranges from 2017 up to 2020, and which basically head up to 3 projects that have been implemented in the field. So one is this, what we call SIDA Danida, which is funded by Canadian and the Danish funds. Then there is the USAID funded Safer project, and then there is the European Union project called Cross Border. So we managed to collect all those data. The second last column on the right is reporting the sample size, and where you see short or long, meaning the length of the questionnaire. So we basically use this set of questions. We do the data collection and analysis, and then we basically can use RIMA for both policy implication and impact evaluation. And that's the use that we are making in this exercise, the data set that we are using in this exercise specifically is the SIDA Danida data set to mimic what we were discussing so far. So basically to have an idea of the cost-benefit analysis of an intervention and to see whether this money has been spent in the most effective way and how much every single increase in any single component of resilience translated into an increase of the overall resilience capacity. This ultimately has a lot of meaning for each of us who is working in this environment, because what we are basically trying to measure is what happens if I manage to say this in a very simple language, how if I manage to increase by whatever 10% the level of livestock available to a community, how much does it cost? How much this translates into an increase of resilience capacity? On the contrary, the other side of the coin, how much does it take to me to fill the gap caused by a shock who killed 10% of the livestock of a community? So that's exactly what we're trying to do, to monetize, to quantify the positive effect of an intervention or the negative effect of a shock. Next slide, please. Thanks. So the type of data that we are being using in this exercise specifically are being collected through a normal quantitative data collection, implemented normally through tablets in the community of Torit and Capoeira. We also combine this with focus group discussion and key informant interviews to triangulate the information provided by the quant and the qualitative data collection, which is exactly what we do need to have a thorough understanding of the situation. We of course train enumerators. We have a pretty standard approach to measure to train our enumerators, and then we went to the field. So basically what we did is to separate treatment group and control group, so to make sure that both were represented in this sample, and we therefore try to avoid possible contamination of these two groups. Yes, next slide, please. Okay, so at this point, I think that I need to hand over this to John.
Thank you very much, and I miss Juba. This is my third learning event, but the only one outside of Juba. So hopefully the folks that, things will improve soon for us to again visit that wonderful city and country of South Sudan. But still, that is not preventing us to continue to work and generate evidence and knowledge to support the whole resilience agenda that partners and the country is putting together as far as South Sudan is concerned. My component is probably the least important after Mark and Marco have spoken. So what I will do is to provide some details on the methodology and some of the findings that we have as of now. Next slide. As Marco and Mark already touched on this, so the way we look at the analysis, the cost benefit design scenario is we Marco lay out the pillars, the RIMA pillars. By themselves, they are not policy instrument. They are not programming instrument because there is no out there anything like basic services or assets or that one can activate to achieve resilience capacity and food security. So what we do is under each of those pillars, we look into the actual interventions like access to health, access to education, access to the market. So those are our instrument, the scenario instrument, so to speak. So we increase or decrease depending on what we are looking for. And then we run simulation by estimating the whole RIMA model that Marco described. And then because you either increase or decrease the level of those instruments, like access to market will require building a road. Because you do that, there is a cost related to that additional effort, so to speak. And so what we do based on available data, we estimate what the additional investment required to increase, I don't know, the access to market by 10%, 30%, and so to speak. So the overall goal is to identify what are the most cost-effective combination of those interventions for both resilience capacity and food security. I say combination because some of those expected goal targets can only be achieved by combining several interventions. And I wanted to highlight here that the RIMA framework that we are using actually capture the idea of convergence, which means that for you to achieve that single target goal, you need to combine several interventions coming sometime from different areas. Next slide, please. So in a way, so this is how we run the simulation, as I said, because in the data set you have continuous and then discrete variables. The way you implement the scenario is a little bit different, but the idea is either to increase or decrease and see how the increase or decrease in interventions impact resilience capacity and ultimately food security. And we rerun the structural equation model and of course assessing the cost effectiveness, of course, of each of the interventions. Next. Yes, as you know, you would expect, many of us are familiar with this pillar. As Marco presented them, don't have the same impact on resilience capacity. Again, this emphasizes that idea of convergence, that you need to put together several interventions, but not all have the same impact on resilience capacity. Here, we report the elasticity of change elasticity of resilience capacity with respect to each individual pillar, meaning that what is the impact on resilience capacity of a 1% change in each individual pillar. And as from the data we use, adaptive capacity by far has the highest effect. This is great, but it, and as we will see, it does not mean that adaptive capacity is the most cost effective. So far, this is where we all we're stopping the analysis. So this time we wanted to go a little bit further than that, and that's the idea of the cost benefit component. Next. Again, there is a great deal of gender. It's not the resilience capacity, all the assets, they are not gender neutral. I missed the part of this meeting, this morning's interventions, but I hope that this was really highlighted, that whatever interventions that are being designed should be gender-based, because the resilience capacity and all the other pillars are not gender neutral. You will see, you know, the red, the blue represent male household led, the red female household led household, and you can see that there are some significant difference between the two groups. Next. Now, so this is one of the result of this analysis, and here we use only the. It's unfortunate that you cannot see. I don't see the bottom of the graph, which show the actual interventions. Yeah, that's it's. Or, I mean, okay. The first, it's I don't know how to. Yeah, the graph is not complete, but anyway, the idea is we are using food security as the benefit, and here measure through food consumption score. And we use three interventions because those are the interventions for which we have data. One was the agriculture inputs, trainings, and overall household wealth. It is unfortunate that you cannot see it. Yes, so it's difficult for me to explain why they are different. So we have on that graph three different interventions in terms of agriculture inputs, trainings, and wealth. And each of them, we run a couple of scenarios from 10% increase all the way to 90% increase. And the result is that additional increase in training come with much higher relative cost compared to agriculture input and wealth. And when you compare agriculture input and wealth, they tend to have the same relative pattern in terms of relative cost. Next one. Next. Yeah, is it one? Oh, okay. No. Please go back to the previous one. So here, basically what we did was what is the benefit per unit of cost? So every time you invest one additional dollar in South Sudan, what is the benefit in terms of food security here, food consumption score? What we found is that investment in training is the least cost effective intervention of the three. Again, agriculture input, you increase agriculture input, you increase training, you increase overall household wealth. The most cost effective is the agriculture input, followed by wealth, overall household wealth, and the training is the least cost effective. And again, we use food consumption score as a measure of that resilience related benefit here. Next one. All right, so what do the findings from our initial cost study suggest? Couple of things. First, to improve resilience capacity for food security, as I said, you will require more than one type of interventions. Again, this highlights this idea of convergence. You need intervention from different areas to achieve that resilience capacity for food security. One pillar or one single intervention won't do it. Like just providing access to irrigation is not enough for you to achieve that resilience capacity. You'll probably need to build some community institution. You need to rebuild the trust. You need to rebuild some, I don't know, vocational training infrastructure. So that's the first find. The second is the issue of gender and of course special effect. Programs should be gender-based and location specific. Selection of effective intervention should account for cost of targeted interventions. I wish we had unlimited resources for resilience building. Unfortunately, operating under tight budget constraint require for us to select the interventions that are cost effective. I will maybe ask I will ask Mark to go through the last one on the what is required to implement a full-fledged cost benefit for resilience in development assistance.
Okay, very good. Thank you, John. Yeah, I'll make a few points before going on to questions. Is when we think about theories of change that are a typical part of programming, what one finds is that cost information is not factored into the theories of change explicitly. I think there's an opportunity here to think about how we can bring cost issues into our theories of change. And we have these boxes with lines connected, and we don't often always have dollars attached to them. We do in practice, but not in our analysis. Secondly, one of the great challenges we have is data availability. It would really be great if we could have cost data as a standard part of program implementation. And that would allow us to do cost benefit analysis. I will confess here that it was a struggle to do this work, not just analytically, just getting the data in hand. It's difficult to get because in some cases it's often impractical. If you have one staff person, they're not just working on one intervention or one program, they're working across multiple programs. So trying to get precise cost data is a challenge that we recognize. Before going on to the questions, I want to make two additional points that may anticipate some questions. The first is, why does cost effectiveness seem to decrease as interventions increase? And this isn't just a question of cost increasing, but cost effectiveness. So we're not the results, the value of the results declines as what you're trying to produce on the outcome side. And I think one of the reasons this happens is that we don't routinely think about coordination and partnerships, which is, bringing us back to an important concept for PFRR. We don't think about how to develop coordination links among interventions. We often tend to silo our work. I think PFRR has a great advantage in that you have built into your DNA is the partnership idea. And if we could bring that into, into a more prominent form of how all of us do our work, that'll be better. Maybe there's a promise there of not of undoing this situation or the findings that show more programs are less cost efficient. Before going on to questions, two more points I want to make just to bring this back to the beginning into some comments I heard this morning. In some ways, I think this is going to be a stretch, but I firmly believe that that our work is in many ways can be viewed as an extension of the stone soup story that was told this morning. This is about resource sharing. It's an optimization problem. How can we get the most out of what we have available in the pot? And how can we share among programs and make our work most cost efficient? And there, that brings us back to the question of what do partnerships mean for our work. So let's go on to the questions. Next slide. These are questions that that we have put forward, and not the only ones, but one, I hope this community can help us explore what is the potential value of cost-benefit analysis at the community level. We're doing this work not simply to do work that's analytically fascinated like a shiny object that catches our interest. We want to do so it has actual value for the community. How might communities think about cost-benefit? Secondly, how can cost-benefit inform the development and implementation of programs if we bring in a cost mentality? Thirdly, how might cost-benefit analysis be used to better target funding? What kind of cost information is needed to do this kind of work? And I just mentioned this a moment ago. We do lack details. Whose job is it would it be to collect cost information, make it a routine part of M&E work? And again, I want to come back to a point I made to begin with. I do see this as a way to empower work going on at the community level. And so it takes and transforms the voice in the wilderness that says we need more funding and into an argument that says, here's why we need more funding, here's the consequences of more funding, and here's the consequences of insufficient funding on the impact side. So I'll stop there and say thank you all for your attention. I know it's getting late in the day in Juba, and appreciate your being here, but we have time for questions, and I'll pass it back to the session chair. Thank you.
Colleagues, thank you for the presentation. I'm the moderator. I'm Alamu Asfau, an economist working for FAO South Sudan. Let me try to quickly summarize, if I can, their presentation, and then we'll go for responding to questions. I have a couple of questions already thrown by participants, which I will ask the presenters. But let me quickly try to summarize. So Mark, Marco, and John, thank you for your presentations. So the presentation was split into two. The first one gave us why ready, the resilience evidence for decision in development initiatives. So we get the response that it is formulated with the idea of increasing resilience measurement rigor and evidence. It also was formulated to hear stakeholders' view on resilience development, which we call focus on responsive resilience measurement. And also it helps in harmonizing measurement tools, given that we have significant increase in measurement tools globally. So when it comes to the analytical piece, I think the work is really an eye-opener in introducing cost into the resilience analysis. So they looked at the real cost and benefits of different investments and did cost effectiveness calculation by using cost benefit scenario development tools, primarily using RIMA, by analyzing the effects of investment, the positive effects of investment and the negative effects of shock. Hence, they collected evidences on analyzing the effects of investment, in which they do an impact evaluation. Also, they attempted to assess evidence based on program and come up with some policy implications. When it comes to their findings, I really I apologize on their behalf. The presentation that they put was not showing properly, but I got a chance to see the earlier version of the presentation. So according to their finding, training or capacity development interventions brought highest benefits in Torit and Capoeira. However, additional training comes at the highest cost compared to other investments, and hence training and capacity is not a cost-effective one, as per their analysis of ratio of cost to benefit analysis. And also the ratio of cost to benefit analysis indicates that agriculture input provision has a more efficient investment followed by wealth increases. So these are really core takeaway findings that we got from them. And so as a major conclusion, so effective intervention should account for the cost of targeted interventions. It is extremely important. And then also multifaceted approach, improving resilience capacity for food security will require more than one type of intervention. And finally, their conclusion shows that programs to be gender-based and location-specific. And so they showed also the importance of coherence and documentation of data availability. I think we will share also the things, we'll share the things, the document at the later stage, and also we'll share the presentation. So now I give the floor for questions and answers. We got two questions. I will float to Mark before reading the other questions. The first question, Marco, and also John, what kind of data did you use in the analysis? That's the first question. And one other question was asked was, can we use other models like Heckman two-stage model to do the analysis as opposed to RIMA? This also is for Marco. If you can respond to these questions, that would be great to start with. Thank you.
I can start if this is okay for you, Mark and John. Maybe you can.
You can start, Marco. That's fine. Yeah.
Okay. And then in case you can contribute. I mean, the data we have used are household level data, and basically, because there is also a third question which I think is related, Alemo, if you don't mind. So it's the question from Karin Gernia. So whether it's possible to factor, if it is possible to factor into this estimation also the psychological aspects, no? And to me, what is the most important thing is that RIMA is an econometric approach that can be applied to whatever data we have. Okay, so if we have data on psychological aspects, or for example, on subjective resilience, on perception of resilience, which is something we as FAO are exploring. If we do have those data and we include them, we think we can include them into a resilience framework, then we can use whatever we do have, okay? As long as it is data at household level, because this approach is at household level, as long as it is at household level, we can use whatever type of data. In our case, we have just used normal household budget survey, especially focused on these aspects of resilience that are presented in the framework. So access to basic services, assets, adaptive capacity, adaptive capacity, social safety nets, and food security. But we can also factor subjective resilience, perception, and other aspects, no? For example. And in terms of what other instrument can be, what other tool can be used, of course, I mean, that's the approach that John, Mark, and I are presenting is employing RIMA, because RIMA is widely adopted in South Sudan, and because we had this, John had the intuition And we developed this together with Mark and me as a discussion. And so we are all familiar with the tool. And so we started with the RIMA. So there are at least two parts in what we are developing. RIMA is just a tool that we are adopting, but what we think is more important is to link a measurement of resilience, which is capable of detecting increases or decreases of singular individual aspects of resilience with an intervention, which is what I was saying during my speech, or whatever it is. That is what we are interested in, is capturing the negative effect of the shock. What happens if I have a shock destroying 10% of my assets, and what happens if then an NGO, an international NGO, a donor, or international organization arrives and help me restoring my asset? How this translates into an increase or in a contraction of my resilience capacity. So that's the point.
Thank you, Marco. Mark, I'm going to give you the floor because I think for the sake of a wider audience, you have already responded for Michelle's question regarding the cost-benefit analysis that should be analyzed. However, we believe that strive for sustainability of outcomes and measuring cost analysis should be measured on a long term. So it would be good, Mark, if you respond to that one. And also, John, if you look at the other question asked by Karin, is how do we account for aspiration and psychosocial dimensions in this cost-benefit analysis of resilience?
Okay, shall I respond to the first then?
Please, Mark.
Excuse me. So this is a really important question, one that's very close and close to my heart and mind. Marco and I are working on a paper thinking about the importance of time, modeling time seriously. And this is always important in all economic and I would argue social and behavioral research because we're dealing with developmental phenomena that aren't static. In resilience, however, it's critically important. In most of the work, we say very quickly, we're trying to build the resilience of households, communities, and institutions, and in one broad wave of the hand. And that's true. In the resilience literature and in ecology, in the parent literature, they talk about slow variables and fast variables, meaning some things can be changed more quickly than others. And the kind of the broad thinking on this is that the smaller the unit, the more malleable they are, the more easily they change. So change the behavior of an individual is easier than changing the behavior and the response pattern of a household, or a community is more difficult, and to change a government or institutions that may underwrite a lot of resilience is yet more difficult. So if we believe that, and the intuition to me seems reasonable, and it's pretty well proven, is we're trying to build governance and institutions, and we're trying to establish rule of law in a country, which may be important for building stability and resilience. How long does that take? Well, it probably takes longer than a period of funding for which a monitoring and evaluation project is given, which may be 2 or 3 years. So we have a bit of a problem. We have maybe our data collection often is constrained by funding periods, which makes no sense. It makes every bit of sense from a project management point of view, or from a scientific and analytical point of view. We kind of bump into that wall. And we have things like a baseline, midline, end line that are defined by the funding period. And so we often don't even track our indicators long enough to know what the impact of it is. And so this to me is a fundamental and very serious problem that affects or infects a lot of the work we do, that we don't think seriously enough about time. We don't have a good theory. The theory of change doesn't take time into consideration as well as it should. I mean, how long does it take to build community? My embarrassing answer to that is, I don't know. It depends.
Thank you so much, Mark. John, I mean, we are told by the organizers that we are remaining with 10 minutes. So, okay. John, if you can respond to the two questions, That would be great. So the first question is the psychosocial question, which was asked earlier. And then Chuck Chopak is asking, more clarity is required on the lower returns of capacity building. Can you please add more of how the analysis was done and how was that assessed and concluded? If you combine the two, that would be perfect.
All right, let me, yes, thank you. On the aspiration and psychosocial dimensions, a good resilience package include always the qualitative and quantitative components to it. We cannot possibly monetize everything related to resilience building. The cost-benefit analysis will fall under the quantitative package component, which gives you a layer of a tool in terms of policy making, in terms of decision-making process to identify those cost-benefit interventions. But once you have that, you need to bring on to bring the qualitative component where I think aspiration and psychosocial dimensions are sit, because it's a process. That decision making is a process. So you start with those interventions, and then you have to go through the community. You talk to the community. It has to be inclusive, and in that process, you have to include community aspiration and psychosocial dimensions. And of course, if we can measure them, then yes, we can easily include that in any of the simulations that we do. So that's how I will respond to it. Now, what to say about the lower return of capacity building? Again, the issue of time here comes in, because if you distribute inputs, agriculture inputs, the return, you can measure the return by the next season, the harvest season. But when you build capacity, the return may take longer to manifest. So the measurement or estimation of the return is a little bit different depending on the type of intervention, and especially when it comes to capacity building. So that's what I'll say. It will take some time, and even sometimes it's diffused through some other, you build capacity, you provide training on how to best use information on soil composition. So that's the capacity building aspect. But that capacity building is required when you distribute agriculture inputs. When yield goes up, you can allocate the increase in yields only because you distributed improved seed. But the dimension of capacity building is also part of that, which is sometimes difficult to disentangle and may take a longer. So it depends on how you, the type of interventions and the tool you use to measure them.
Yeah. The capacity building component is much broader than the training, which was analyzed in here. The final, probably, if we have the time, we can continue. But Mark, there is a question saying, has Ready done any work to, it's also another difficult question, Ready done any work to try to quantify the value of the community's contribution to the shared development objectives? Or if John contributes also to this discussion, that would be great. Mark first.
Yes, I'll respond by saying that I was just actually writing a response to that question. We're currently in the process of co-developing a measurement framework for the government of Kenya. Actually, it's co-developing, where we'll be working closely with the ASALs. And as part of that work, we'll be measuring community inputs as part of the resilience capacity, see how well they're able to respond to various shocks. And one innovation, by the way, in the shock side is moving beyond drought shocks, looking at other kind of shocks. So the answer is in process. So we've not done it with Kenya. Sorry, with South Sudan. We're in the process of doing that now with Kenya. We have, though, followed closely the work the DAI is doing, Policy Link, and the IA for our work, Information Architecture for Resilience, and working with them on their instrumentation, not developing it, but doing a review of it, technical review. Thanks for the question.
Thank you so much. So organizers, I think before I give you the final floor, I think it is a final recommendation from Murima, which we appreciate. It would be interesting for the tech team to look at. It would be interesting to review current partnership area programs in relation to agreement with community priorities, which interventions give more returns for investment. This is an ongoing process. May even be possible to check change in resilience after the area program has course corrected. Yes, there is also a response from Mark. So I give the floor back to the organizers. Thank you so much. It seems that there are plenty of other discussion points are being thrown out. So we will probably get a time to have a separate room chat. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Mark. Thank you, Marco. Thank you, John. And thank you, Lemo, for moderating. This was a very informative session. And I think your findings definitely builds an empirical case for convergence. So we look forward to hearing more and to see how the resilience initiatives really lend itself to being bang for buck. Once again, I want to thank everyone who stayed with us from the beginning, and we look forward to having you tomorrow for the second day of the 3rd Annual Learning Forum, brought to you by the Partnership for Recovery and Resilience in South Sudan.
Yeah, sorry, Jeff. The presentation needs to be modified a little bit before sharing it widely. Thank you so much.
Yes, we'll do that. Yep. Thank you.
Okay, Mark, when you do that, you can send it back to us and then we'll do so on your behalf. We will post it to the ALF website, which is alf.southsudanpfrr.org.
Very good. Hey, thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to join you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye. Take care.